As soon as his voice trailed off, Han Li swept a sleeve through the air to release a ball of golden light, which transformed into the featureless miniature figure that was the gold-devouring beetles. Jin Tong, follow fellow Taoist blood soul for now and make sure to protect her, Han Li instructed. The miniature figure offered no response to this, but it immediately teleported over to the blood soul, hovering in a stationary manner above her head. The blood soul had witnessed Jin Tong in action on the way here. A grateful look immediately appeared on her face. Thank you, Senior Han. With Senior Jin protecting me, my safety in this heavenly cauldron palace will be ensured. She then summoned a pristine white vial, before offering it to Han Li with both hands. This was a vial that contained a drop of the aforementioned blood essence. There are other people who have arrived here even earlier than we have, so we should split up and begin our search right away, Han Li said. The blood soul gave an affirmative response, and thus, each of them flew toward a different cluster of buildings, with Jin Tong following along closely behind the blood soul. In order to venture deeper into the heavenly cauldron palace, Han Li had to eradicate the restrictions of other areas that stood in his way. Thus, as soon as he appeared before a white light barrier, he immediately made a grabbing motion to summon an azure longsword, which he slashed viciously toward the light barrier. The white light barrier immediately shattered as if it were a piece of chinaware, following which the surrounding area blurred, and Han Li suddenly found himself on a path in a lush forest. The trees around him were around 70 to 80 feet tall, and at first glance, they seemed to be no different from normal trees. But upon closer inspection, Han Li discovered that there was a series of twisted faces with their eyes tightly shut etched onto the surfaces of these trees. There were faces of all types of descriptions, but all of them wore blissful expressions as if they were experiencing pleasant slumbers. Han Li's eyes narrowed slightly upon seeing this, and right at this moment, an intoxicating floral scent suddenly wafted toward him from the other end of the path. With his enormous spiritual sense, the aroma resulted in nothing more than slight mental discomfort following inhalation. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face, and he knew that he was situated in some type of profound restriction. He immediately began to advance along the path, but after taking no more than 20 steps, the faces on all of the trees on either side of him suddenly opened their eyes in unison. Inky black threads of light then shot forth from those eyes, every single one of which was extremely sharp and giving off peculiar energy fluctuations. In response to this, Han Li simply conjured up a gray light barrier that shielded him from all sides. The oncoming light threads struck the light barrier like a torrential storm, only to instantly vanish into the light barrier without a trace. All the while, Han Li was still continuing onward in an unhurried manner without pause. His actions seemed to have provoked the faces on the trees. One of them let loose a shrill cry, upon which all of the faces adopted furious expressions. They opened their mouths to release extremely pungent bursts of green flames, transforming the path into a sea of fire. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face, and he continued onward without pause, while the green flames were also absorbed by the gray light barrier. Furthermore, countless gray translucent threads were erupting out of the gray light barrier, and every single thread struck one of the faces on the trees with unerring accuracy. The faces would then let loose anguished cries before vanishing from the trees. In the instant that all of the faces on a tree disappeared, the tree itself would wither away and become completely devoid of vitality. After walking for over 1,000 feet, Han Li finally made his way out of the forest, where he discovered a colorful flower garden. A series of round flower pots were sitting on a lush lawn, and inside the pots were planted floral trees, each of which was around 10 feet tall, but there was only a single huge flower growing on each tree. These flowers all differed in color and shape, but they were currently all at full bloom. This was where the intoxicating floral scent was coming from. Han Li swept his spiritual sense over the giant flowers, upon which his expression changed slightly, but he continued onward. Right as he was walking past a certain flower pot, the giant flowers nearby suddenly transformed into menacing ghostly heads before cackling as they pounced directly toward Han Li. HMPH, how insolent! Han Li harumphed coldly as he rubbed his hands together before raising them on either side of himself. Two thick bolts of golden lightning immediately sprang forth, transforming into lightning worms several thousand feet in length before pouncing toward the entire flower garden. The ghostly heads nearby were instantly reduced to nothingness upon coming into contact with the lightning worms, while the giant flowers that were further away also transformed into ghostly heads, before fleeing in all directions right before the golden lighting reached them. Thus, the scenic and tranquil flower garden suddenly became a devilish realm that was filled with swirling devilish chi. However, these devilish beings naturally weren't going to actually be able to escape from Han Li's divine devilbane lightning. The two lightning worms immediately exploded at Han Li's behest, sending countless arcs of lightning erupting in all directions to form two golden nets that enshrouded the entire flower garden beneath them. All of the ghostly heads were eradicated by the lightning nest with no exceptions, and even the devilish chi in the air was rapidly fading in the face of the golden lightning. At this point, Han Li had already casually emerged from the flower garden and arrived at a small reddish-black lake. There seems to be no end to these things, and they refuse to give up. Brother Zio, if you can't think of a way to deal with them, then I'm going to capture all of them, Mistress Wan Hua said with an enraged expression. Currently, she was situated in a desert-like environment with Taoist Qing Ping and Zio Ming. One large, earthy yellow puppet after another was constantly erupting out of the sand around them, wielding different types of weapons as they unleashed fierce attacks toward the trio without any regard for their own safety. Even though these attacks posed no threat to the three Grand Ascension stage beings, and the puppets could be easily destroyed, it seemed there was an infinite supply of these puppets that would never be exhausted. After entering this area, the three of them had already destroyed more than 100,000 of these puppets, but their numbers hadn't been reduced in the slightest. In order to conserve magic power, the three of them weren't even attacking anymore, and were simply passively defending themselves with protective treasures. Calm down, fellow Taoist Wan Hua. I'm close to tracking down the core of this formation. Even if you capture all of these puppets, more will appear to take their place. Besides, these aren't actual puppets. They're sand dolls created by the power of this formation. As soon as we leave this place, these puppets will immediately crumble away, so there's no point in capturing them, Zio Ming replied as he searched for something while holding a shimmering white jade formation plate. Mistress Wan Hua was ecstatic to hear that the formation core was close to being tracked down, and she chuckled. I'm just worried that the centrum of the restrictions in the Heavenly Cauldron Palace would fall into someone else's hands if we get delayed here for too long. Rest assured, with fellow Taoist Qing Ping's guidance, we're already taking the shortest route to the centrum of the Heavenly Cauldron Palace. All we have to do is pass through 3 palace clusters to reach there, so there's no way anyone else will get there before us, Zio Ming replied in a confident manner. I certainly hope so, but I think it would be best not to grow complacent. After all, that human from the Tian Yuan continent possesses unfathomable powers. Perhaps he has some special method to break through the restrictions here. If we can reach the centrum earlier, then we should do so at all costs, Mistress Wan Hua insisted. Fellow Taoist Wan Hua is right. Brother Zio, I also think it would be best to reach the center of the Heavenly Cauldron Palace as soon as possible, even if doing so would result in some expenditure of power, Taoist Qing Ping agreed. Zio Ming's brows furrowed slightly upon hearing this, but he nodded in response in the end. All right, in that case, I'll use some brute force methods to find the location of the formation core. Immediately thereafter, he made a hand seal, and the projection of a nine-eyed blood toad instantly appeared behind him amid a flash of crimson light. At the same time, his body swelled drastically to over 100 feet in size, and his aura also became significantly more formidable. Go! Zio Ming let loose a low cry as he flipped a hand over to produce a formation plate, then opened his mouth to release several balls of energy into the treasure. The formation plate immediately began to release countless white runes amid a loud buzzing sound, and the runes formed a small light formation, which released a thick pillar of light that struck a certain point in space in a flash. That section of space immediately began to tremor and warp, but it then quickly returned to normal. That's not it. I'll try the next place, Zio Ming said as he pointed a finger toward the light formation. The light formation immediately swiveled around to target another direction at his behest. Another thick pillar of white light was then released in that direction, and on this occasion, the space there tremored violently before a giant silver rune that was around the size of a house emerged amid a burst of spatial fluctuations. We're in luck, Zio Ming said with a smile, then injected his magic power into the giant toad projection behind himself. The projection slowly opened its 9 golden eyes, directing its gaze toward the massive silver rune. A resounding boom rang out as a thin shimmering golden thread erupted out of each eye, piercing through the silver rune in a flash before slicing it into pieces. Chapter 2357, Zhu Yingxi and Pater Chapter Kailei. Once the silver rune completely disintegrated into specks of spiritual light, the surrounding scenery and puppets also disappeared. The space up ahead twisted and blurred, and a cluster of buildings appeared up ahead. The restriction has been broken. Well done, Brother Zio. Mistress Wan Hua was ecstatic to see this. The restriction here is quite profound, so it might really be the case that no one has visited this place before. If it isn't for the fact that we're short on time, I would definitely search through this area, Zio Ming sighed. It's all right, Brother Zio. Even if there are treasures in these outer palace clusters, they won't be of much use to us. Once we get to the center and take control over the palace's centrum, all of the treasures will be ours, Taoist Qing Ping said with a smile. I understand, but it still leaves a bad taste in my mouth to be unable to secure treasures that are right there for the taking, Zio Ming sighed. Thus, the three of them flew along a small path beside the cluster of buildings toward another light barrier. In another restriction on the outskirts of the heavenly cauldron palace, the brocade-robed man was appraising a giant two-headed ape before him with a cold expression. All of the disciples from his sect had already formed a profound formation to trap the giant ape, and the formation's power had been raised to its maximal extent as it compressed further and further, while sending bursts of enormous invisible force surging toward the ape in a frenzy. A string of cracks and pops would occasionally ring out, and finally, the giant ape was completely immobilized by the formation. Only then did the brocade-robed man sweep a sleeve through the air, releasing a streak of silver light that revolved around the massive ape before slicing it in half down the middle. Immediately thereafter, the murky gray space instantly crumbled away. Within a certain swamp-like area, there was a giant centipede with blue lightning flashing all over its body, a massive scorpion that was enshrouded within black chi, and a huge python with an extremely flat head. The three beasts were currently wreaking havoc within a sea of beasts, and a thin and hideous elderly man sat atop each of their heads. The sea of beasts was comprised of creatures of all types of different descriptions, and all of them possessed powers equivalent to those of low-grade and mid-grade cultivators. They were attacking the three giant creatures at the center with all their might, but the three elderly men merely sat in a still manner atop the creatures' heads, paying no heed to what was happening around them. Outside the five-colored restriction, 5 identical young men were seated in midair in a completely expressionless manner, seemingly waiting for something. All of a sudden, spatial fluctuations erupted, and a giant black hole appeared out of thin air. A ball of crimson light shot forth out of the black hole, then transformed into a crimson humanoid figure with green light shimmering in his eyes and an indescribably baleful aura emanating from his body. The 5 young men immediately rose to their feet. Then each summoned 12 white bone-flying swords with green flames burning over their surfaces. The crimson figure seemed to be quite surprised by the sight of the 5 young men. "You're the 5 Zhu He clones. Are you planning to target me? We came here in quite a hurry, so we don't have a key to break this seal. As such, we'll have to take yours. Regardless of who you are, hand over the key and we'll let you go," one of the young men said in an expressionless manner. "Haha, how audacious of you. I just so happen to require some blood essence to nurture this body of mine. How about I take yours?" The crimson figure chortled as he transformed into 5 streaks of crimson light that surged directly toward the 5 Zhu He clones. "Your blood shadow arts are indeed quite formidable, but there's a way to counter it." One of the young men chuckled as white light suddenly erupted from his body before surging toward the oncoming streak of crimson light. Meanwhile, the other 4 young men abruptly vanished on the spot in unison. In the next instant, a string of rumbling booms rang out, and a fierce battle commenced. Letter 1D4 F, letter 1D4 FB, letter 1D4 86, letter 1D6 58, letter 1D4 98, letter 1D4 E, letter 1D4 FF, letter 1D6 58, letter 1D4 F8, letter 1D6 62. There were already close to 1,000 high-grade cultivators gathered outside the giant gate, most of whom were at the body integration stage or spatial tempering stage. There was a group of over 30 of them bombarding the gate with a series of ferocious attacks, but the gate refused to budge, and only the golden and silver runes on its surface were flashing slightly. Everyone else was looking on from nearby, displaying no intention to assist or disrupt them. "Useless idiots, you think you have what it takes to enter the heavenly cauldron palace? Piss off." Right at this moment, a thunderous boom suddenly rang out up above, causing everyone's ears to ring incessantly, and some of the weaker cultivators plummeted straight out of the sky. A ball of crimson lightning that was around an acre in size then tore its way out of thin air before crashing down upon the giant gate. Countless bolts of thick crimson lightning began to surge all over the gate, sending scorching heat waves spreading in all directions. The dozens of cultivators situated nearby immediately shot back in retreat as their expressions changed drastically. Several of them acted too late, and they were swept up by the heat waves amid agonized howls, but their cries of pain quickly drew to an abrupt halt, seemingly indicating that they had already perished. The giant gate was forced open slightly by the attack, and the bolts of crimson lightning immediately converged to form a ball again, then instantly entered through the gap that had opened up. The massive gate then slowly swung shut again amid a rumbling boom. "That was Patriarch Kyle, that had to have been him," someone exclaimed. In contrast with the previous opening of the Heavenly Cauldron Palace, where most of the entrants were body integration stage beings, there were clearly far more grand ascension stage beings who had arrived on this occasion. It seemed that the keys of the palace had finally attracted all of these formidable beings. 3 days later, Han Li was situated in a long corridor in the Heavenly Cauldron Palace with two puppets, one golden and one silver, standing in his way. The puppets were around 70 to 80 feet tall, and they were each holding two giant hammers of different colors, but their bodies were riddled with wounds, indicating that they had already endured battles in the past. Han Li only took an indifferent glance at the two puppets before directing his attention toward the red wooden door behind them, and he immediately began to make his way toward that door. In the instant that Han Li began to approach them, the two puppets raised their hammers before sending them crashing viciously down toward him. Countless azure threads erupted out of Han Li's body amid a flash of azure light, and the two puppets were instantly reduced to countless scraps along with the hammers they were wielding. Han Li strode calmly past the remains of the puppets before sweeping a sleeve toward the red door, releasing a burst of invisible force that pushed the door open. A large hall was revealed beyond the door, and within the hall were rows of rectangular stone platforms that were laden with all types of treasures. Some of these treasures were glowing brightly, while others were very dim, and there were over 1,000 of them in total. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face as he strode into the hall. Meanwhile, Mistress Wan Hua and Taoist Qing Ping were hovering in midair with dark expressions above a boundless sea. Not far in front of the two of them was Xiao Ming, who was seated with his legs crossed and his eyes tightly shut. He was holding a formation plate in one hand, while the fingers on his other hand were trembling incessantly, seemingly calculating something. Who would have thought that just this second area would have such a formidable illusion? "We've already been trapped here for over 2 days, right?" Mistress Wan Hua asked. "Indeed, I also didn't think that this area would have such a powerful illusionary restriction that even Brother Zio can't eradicate in a short time. Having said that, this is only to be expected. This is only the second area to us, but due to the route we chose, we're already quite deep in the Heavenly Cauldron Palace. Once we break through this area, we shouldn't be too far away from the center," Taoist Qing Ping replied with slightly furrowed brows. "I certainly hope that that's the case," Mistress Wan Hua sighed. Meanwhile, Xiao Ming continued to sit still on the spot, as if he were completely oblivious to what was happening around him. 7 days later, the Blood Soul emerged from a hall in a certain area of the Heavenly Cauldron Palace, and judging from her brooding expression, it seemed that she hadn't reaped any rewards. Right at this moment, a ball of crimson lightning suddenly shot forth toward her before transforming into a tall, crimson-robed elderly man with golden lightning patterns on his face. The Blood Soul was quite alarmed to see this, and she immediately swept a sleeve through the air, releasing 2 balls of azure light that transformed into a pair of armored puppets. One puppet was wearing azure armor while wielding a huge bow that was as tall as a grown man, while the other was clad in black armor, wielding a long blue spear. The elderly man was rather surprised to see these puppets before a cold look appeared on his face. "Oh, body integration stage puppets, how rare! Who are you and who did you accompany into this palace?" The Blood Soul immediately identified the elderly man as a grand ascension stage, and her heart sank upon making this discovery. "I am Blood Soul, and I accompanied a certain senior Han into this palace. May I ask your name, senior?" "I've never heard of a grand ascension stage with the Han surname. Is this a fellow Taoist who only made his breakthrough recently?" "That doesn't matter anyway. Hand over your key and everything you obtained in there. Don't try to fool me either. I'll know if you're telling the truth once I use a soul search technique on you," the elderly man said in a menacing manner. The blood soul was naturally very alarmed to hear this, but she forced a smile onto her own face as she replied, "I didn't manage to find anything in there, and the key is being carried by senior hand. Isn't it unbecoming of someone of your status to be threatening a junior like me? If you're not going to hand it over, then I'll have to take it by force," the elderly man said as a cold smile appeared on his face. Chapter 2358, Bloodlet Snake. The elderly man stepped forward and covered a distance of several hundred feet in a flash, instantly arriving before the blood soul. The blood soul hurriedly shot back in retreat, while the azure-armored puppet pulled back the string of its bow before releasing countless streaks of golden light. Meanwhile, the black-armored puppet thrust its spear through the air, and a giant blue flower with a diameter of around 10 feet was manifested at the tip of the spear before descending toward the elderly man. As the flower descended from above, it released a glacial aura, threatening to freeze the space around the elderly man. At the same time, the streaks of golden light were converging from all directions. The two puppets were displaying seamless teamwork. The elderly man harumphed coldly as a layer of crimson lightning flashed all over his body, tearing the surrounding glacial chi apart and repelling all of the oncoming streaks of golden light with ease. He then made a grabbing motion toward the blue flower, and it immediately vanished amid a dull thump, revealing the tip of the blue spear, which the elderly man caught with his bare hand with ease. The spear-wielding puppet tried to wrench its spear out of the man's grasp, but the weapon refused to budge, as if it had taken root on the man's hand. Meanwhile, a hint of light flashed through the bow-wielding puppet's eyes, and it began to emit an astonishing aura as it released a long streak of golden light from its bow, which hurtled directly toward the elderly man. The elderly man chuckled coldly as he opened his mouth to release a ball of crimson lightning, which instantly swelled to the size of a water tank. The two immediately exploded on contact, and the crimson lighting completely inundated the streak of golden light before surging toward the bow-wielding puppet with unerring accuracy, instantly reducing it to ashes. At the same time, the spear-wielding puppet was also destroyed by a giant crimson hand that had suddenly appeared out of thin air. Immediately thereafter, the elderly man appeared right in front of the blood soul before reaching a hand out toward her. "Hand over your key and treasure, and I'll grant you a quick and painless death. Otherwise, he." A sinister look appeared on his face as he spoke. "You were able to enter this place, so you clearly have a key of your own. Why are you so intent on taking mine?" the blood soul asked as she retreated with a fearful expression. "HMPH, do you think I don't know that there are some special places in the Heavenly Cauldron Palace that can only be accessed using the corresponding keys? I only have a replica key, so I naturally have to collect other keys as backups. If you're not willing to hand over your key, then I'll have to take it by force." The elderly man harumphed coldly as he made a grabbing motion toward the blood soul. The gesture seemed to be very ordinary, but the blood soul was struck by the feeling that the entire world around her was locked within the man's grasp, affording her no avenue for evasion. Right as the elderly man was about to grab onto her shoulder, spatial fluctuations suddenly erupted above her, and a streak of translucent light shot forth toward the elderly man like lightning. This attack had come without any warning or premonition, and even though the elderly man was a seasoned Grand Ascension stage being, he was still caught off guard, and it was too late for him to evade. A dull thump rang out as the streak of light revolved around his outstretched arm was, instantly slicing it into 7 or 8 sections. However, the elderly man's body blurred, and he instantly appeared several hundred feet away as he appraised the blood soul with a furious expression. "Who's there?" A burst of blood mist sprang erupted out of his wound as he spoke. Countless crimson threads writhed and intertwined, as a brand new arm quickly took shape. For a cultivator primarily using a blood Dao cultivation art, regeneration of dismembered limbs was a simple task. No one emerged in the wake of the elderly man's enraged cry, but the blood soul's expression had become a lot calmer, and she was continuing to slowly retreat. The elderly man's expression darkened even further upon seeing this, and he aimed a vicious glare at the blood soul before quickly pointing a finger on his remaining arm toward her. In the next instant, a rumbling boom rang out around 10 feet in front of the blood soul, and the streak of crimson light reappeared before transforming into a short crimson spear that plunged directly toward her chest. This sequence of events had taken place in nothing more than the blink of an eye, and it was too late for the blood soul to evade or adopt defensive measures. Despite her steadfast nature, a hint of panic had crept into her eyes. Right at this moment, golden light flashed in front of her, and the purplish-golden Jin Tong appeared before waving a hand through the air to swat the crimson spear away. The elderly man's pupils contracted slightly at the sight of Jin Tong, and a puzzled look appeared on his face. "Who are you and how are you related to her?" he asked. Jin Tong merely appraised the elderly man with a wooden expression, displaying no intention to provide an answer. It quickly made a grabbing motion with one hand, conjuring up a series of translucent golden threads that formed a giant net, which enshrouded the entire surrounding space. The elderly man was furious to see this. "Seeing as you're intent on battling me, then allow me to examine your abilities." As soon as his voice trailed off, he made a hand seal, and countless bolts of crimson lightning erupted out of his body. He then opened his mouth to release an antiquated mirror that was enshrouded within a ball of silver light. As soon as the mirror appeared, countless silver runes surged out of its surface in a frenzy before transforming into balls of silver lightning. "Go!" the elderly man yelled before sweeping a sleeve through the air, and the crimson and silver lighting intertwined to form a massive lightning cloud with a diameter of around half a kilometer before surging toward Jin Tong. Jin Tong remained completely expressionless upon seeing this, and it extended a finger forward, upon which the translucent golden threads instantly shot forth toward the lightning cloud in a torrential barrage. Bursts of loud crackling rang out within the lightning cloud, and translucent threads instantly punched countless holes into the cloud, causing it to shrink rapidly in size. The elderly man was completely astonished by what he was seeing. This attack wasn't his ultimate trump card, but it was definitely an ability that he relied heavily upon. That silver mirror was an incomplete, profound heavenly treasure, and in conjunction with his crimson lightning, it had felled countless powerful opponents, yet the attack had been dispelled by his opponent with ease. What exactly were those translucent threads, and how were they completely unaffected by his lightning? Right as the elderly man was looking on in a stunned manner, Jin Tong flicked his fingers through the air, and a chill ran down the elderly man's spine as countless streaks of invisible sword qi appeared out of thin air before surging toward him. His expression changed drastically as he immediately swept a sleeve through the air, releasing an azure wooden bowl that appeared above him in a flash, then transformed into an azure light barrier that shielded him from all sides. At the same time, he made a hand seal with his other hand, and a giant crimson worm projection emerged behind him. As soon as the worm appeared, it opened its mouth to release a vast expanse of crimson lighting, which swept forth in all directions as a barrier of lightning. A string of dull thumps rang out as the lightning came into contact with the invisible sword qi, only to be torn apart like rotten wood. However, the azure light barrier seemed to possess some type of profound power that allowed it to keep the oncoming sword qi at bay. Even so, the elderly man was very alarmed to see this, and his face paled slightly as he hurriedly summoned a strange curved crimson sword out of his storage bracelet. He immediately grabbed onto the sword before opening his mouth to release several balls of blood essence onto it. The blood essence was instantly absorbed upon contact, following which the sword suddenly sprang to life, transforming into a crimson snake. A sinister smile appeared on the elderly man as he hurled the snake forward, and it tumbled through the air before abruptly disappearing on the spot. In the next instant, a burst of crimson mist suddenly emerged near Jin Tong. A pair of translucent threads immediately shot out of Jin Tong's eyes to pierce the crimson mist, but it seemed that there was nothing inside it. Just as Jin Tong was wondering what was happening, the crimson mist suddenly transformed into that snake again before it instantly bit viciously into Jin Tong's shoulder. The elderly man immediately began to chortle with glee upon seeing this. "Haha, your fate is sealed now. That snake is the bloodlight snake, one of the 10 most poisonous snakes on the Blood Sky continent. Even if you possess an immortal body, you'll be reduced to a puddle of blood within mere moments." "Bloodlight snake, does it taste good?" Jin Tong finally spoke for the first time as it appraised the snake on its shoulder with a curious expression. Its voice was very high-pitched, and it struck the listener with a chilling sensation. The elderly man faltered slightly upon hearing this, and he was then greeted by an astonishing sight. Jin Tong suddenly grabbed onto the bloodlight snake's throat, forcibly tearing the snake off its shoulder, then opened its mouth to bite off the snake's head. Chapter 2359, Might of the Spirit Engulfing Heavenly Flames. This so-called mouth was a thin rift that was lined with sharp fangs, which had opened up below Jin Tong's face. The bloodlight snake's headless body was writhing violently in Jin Tong's mouth, sending a geyser of black poisonous blood spraying up several feet into the air. A layer of translucent light surged over Jin Tong's body, and all of the poisonous blood was kept at bay. The elderly man was truly astonished to see this. Before he had a chance to do anything, Jin Tong suddenly cast a cold gaze toward him. A chill immediately ran down the elderly man's spine, following which two streaks of translucent sword chi abruptly appeared out of thin air right in front of him. The two streaks of sword chi didn't appear to be remarkable in any way, but they struck the light barrier before him at an incredible speed. A crisp crack rang out, and the azure light barrier shuddered before shattering on contact. The chilling sensation that the elderly man was experiencing became even more pronounced as the streaks of sword chi continued on toward him, and he knew that he could no longer hold back. Five-colored light flashed from his glabella, and a five-colored shield instantly appeared before swelling to several tens of feet in size, shielding his entire body behind it. The shield's surface was riddled with layers of intricate spirit patterns, as well as countless dazzling runes. The two streaks of sword chi struck the giant shield one after another amid a pair of dull thumps. As the shield clashed with the first streak of sword chi, a burst of piercing light and violent energy fluctuations erupted forth. The sword chi was eradicated, but a huge crack had also appeared on the shield. The second streak of sword chi then instantly struck the same part of the shield, and it was immediately sliced in half, no longer able to offer any further resistance. All of this had happened in the blink of an eye, and from the elderly man's perspective, he had only just summoned the five-colored shield before it was sliced in half. A flash of light then appeared before his eyes, following which his vision turned completely dark. From a third-person perspective, the second streak of sword chi had revolved around his neck, instantly decapitating him. Almost at the exact same moment, the giant crimson worm projection behind him suddenly exploded, sending arcs of crimson lightning surging violently in all directions. A ball of crimson light flew out of the elderly man's headless body, then sped toward a certain direction with a miniature crimson figure within it. All of a sudden, Jin Tong vanished on the spot amid a flash of golden light, then abruptly appeared right in front of the ball of crimson light amid a burst of spatial fluctuations. It then raised an arm and slammed the ball of light viciously onto the ground down below. The crimson light faded within the crater on the ground, and the nascent soul was revealed with its expression twisted with fury and horror. The nascent soul suddenly gritted its teeth before making a hand seal, and a crimson mist began to pour out of its body, indicating that it was about to unleash some type of secret technique. But right at this moment, a streak of translucent sword chi appeared behind it without any warning before slashing toward it in a flash. The crimson mist was parted, and the nascent soul was sliced in half with an incredulous look still etched on its face, and it disintegrated into specks of spiritual light amid an anguished howl. Thus, the vastly renowned patriarch Kailei was slain by the gold-devouring beetle monarch with ease. At this point, the blood soul had already retreated far away, and an ecstatic look appeared on her face as she approached Jin Tong before extending a curtsy toward it. "Thank you for saving me, Senior Jin. Otherwise, I would have most likely perished here. I was only following my master's orders. You can continue with what you're doing. I'll be watching from the shadows," Jin Tong replied before waving a hand toward the elderly man's body to recover his storage bracelet, then abruptly vanished on the spot. It was clear that Jin Tong possessed far more intelligence than it did when it had first evolved into a gold-devouring beetle monarch. The blood soul extended another bow toward the spot where Jin Tong had just disappeared, then cast a forlorn glance at the two body integration stage puppets before departing from this place. Even though she hadn't encountered any powerful restrictions, nor sensed the presence of her true body, she was convinced that her true body was trapped in this area, so she had to hurry to the next area. Having witnessed Jin Tong's incredible powers, she was instilled with more courage to venture deeper into the palace. 10 days later, the thousands of high-grade cultivators gathered near the giant gate in the myriad Moon Mountain range had all retreated to close to 10 kilometers away, appraising the gate from afar while occasionally discussing and commenting on something. Only 500 to 600 people remained on the edge of the basin. They clearly belonged to the same power, and they were currently setting up a massive super formation to encompass the entire basin. These people all wore the same attire, and the marked symbols on their sleeves indicated that they were all high-grade disciples of the blood-bone sect. There were two people standing side by side in front of these disciples, one of whom was a white-robed elderly man with deep-set eyes and a hooked nose, while the other was a short and stubby woman with a hideous appearance and black spirit patterns etched on her face. Judging from the auras they were giving off, this was a pair of Grand Ascension stage beings. At this moment, they were overseeing the construction of the giant formation while conversing with one another. HMPH, I knew there was something fishy about fellow Taoist Zio staying in Blood Crane City for all these years. As expected, he obtained a true key of the Heavenly Cauldron Palace but didn't tell us anything. If it hadn't been for one of Mistress Wan Hua's disciples spilling this information, we'd most likely still be completely oblivious. The elderly man harumphed coldly. You can't blame fellow Taoist Zio for this. We may be from the same sect, but we don't share any close ties with him. If you and I had obtained the key to the Heavenly Cauldron Palace, we would have also most likely done the same thing. After all, no matter how many treasures there are in the palace, the difference between taking all of the treasures for oneself and having to split them 3 ways is night and day. The woman replied, and despite her hideous appearance, her voice was very sweet and pleasing to the ears, as if it belonged to a young maiden. These two were both also Grand Ascension stage, Grand Elders of the Blood-Bone sect. That's true. I heard that this Heavenly Cauldron Palace contains the true inheritance of Taoist Tianding, so there's no way we would have been willing to let anyone else in. Having said that, there's more than just one true key to the palace. Even if we don't intervene, other Grand Ascension stage beings will definitely step in anyway, so it's not necessarily a wise decision for fellow Taoist Zio to have kept this a secret, the elderly man replied with a cold smile. What's the point in discussing something like this? The fact of the matter is that we've arrived too late, and those who possess keys have already been in the palace for many days. As such, we have no choice but to set up this formation here and force the people inside the palace to share the treasures they obtained once they emerge, the woman said. Judging from my similar past experiences, these people will most likely be teleported out of the palace to random locations, so only around 20% to 30% will return to this place, while everyone else will most likely end up elsewhere, the elderly man mused. It's a good thing. If everyone in the palace were to return to this place, we wouldn't be able to handle so many people even with this formation to assist us. After all, most of the people who entered the palace are no less powerful than you and me. Only when dealing with a small proportion of them will we have a good chance of securing some treasures. Perhaps we won't even have to use this formation, but it'll certainly be a very effective intimidatory device, the woman replied in a confident manner. So that was your plan all along. I was wondering why you brought so many disciples to this place. This is a brilliant strategy. The elderly man chuckled as he rubbed his hands together with glee. An earth-shattering boom rang out, as a translucent wall was shattered by a single attack from Han Li in his giant mountain ape form. He then strode into the teleportation formation that was situated behind the translucent wall before vanishing on the spot in a flash. In the next instant, Han Li found himself standing in the air above a small mountain that was over 10,000 feet tall, and the temporary light formation beneath his feet abruptly disappeared. He quickly swept his gaze through the surrounding area to find that this mountain wasn't very tall, but it took up quite a large area, and the edges of the mountain directly neighbored 7 or 8 areas that were enshrouded under independent light barriers, one of which was the area he had just emerged from. A contemplative look appeared on his face as he inspected the areas one after another. He then seemed to have made up his mind, and was just about to fly toward one of the areas when a burst of spatial fluctuations suddenly erupted nearby. Immediately thereafter, another light formation emerged, and 3 people appeared atop the formation amid a flash of light. Letter 1D487, letter 1D493, letter 1D486, letter 1D486, letter 1D666, letter 1D486, letter 1D484, letter 1D4F8, letter 1D4AT. And Li cast his gaze toward the 3 people, and a cold look appeared in his eyes. The 3 people had naturally also caught sight of Han Li, and they exchanged a bewildered glance with one another before flying directly toward Han Li following a brief voice transmission conversation. The 3 released their powerful auras mid-flight, displaying no intention to hide their animosity. All of a sudden, Han Li raised a giant furry palm before thrusting it toward the oncoming trio, sending a burst of enormous invisible power surging toward them as a gust of fierce wind. The three elderly men dispersed to evade the gust of wind, and one of them yelled, "What is the meaning of this? Do you intend to take on all three of us on your own?" Chapter 2360, Coincidental Encounter. I'm up against three of you, so I naturally have to seize the initiative. Han Li made a grabbing motion with both hands as he spoke, and a ball of light immediately appeared in each hand before transforming into a pair of miniature mountains, one of which was azure while the other was black. Han Li then hurled the mountains viciously through the air, and they transformed into a pair of massive balls of light mid-flight as they hurtled directly toward two of the elderly men. At the same time, a third miniature mountain appeared above them amid a flash of spiritual light, releasing countless streaks of invisible sword chi that surged toward the final elderly man. The three men's expression changed drastically upon seeing this, and the projection of a centipede and a giant scorpion appeared behind two of the elderly men as they thrust their palms viciously toward the oncoming mountains. Their hands seemed to be very ordinary, but in the instant that they were thrust forward, countless blue scales and arcs of flashing lightning immediately appeared over two of them. As for the other two palms, they suddenly took on a glossy black hue while swelling drastically in size, and sharp green claws that were releasing bursts of foul black chi sprouted out of their fingertips. Meanwhile, the third elderly man flipped a hand over to summon a fox-human hybrid statue that was around half a foot tall before tossing it upward. A clear cry rang out from the statue, and it transformed into a five-tailed red fox puppet amid a flash of light. The red fox swept its tails through the air to conjure up a crimson light barrier that encompassed the entire space down below. In the next instant, the four palms struck the two balls of light formed by the pair of extreme mountains, and an earth-shattering boom rang out as violent shockwaves surged throughout the nearby space. The two balls of light shuddered as they were forced to an abrupt halt before reverting back to their extreme mountain forms. However, the two elderly men's expressions changed drastically as they were sent flying like a pair of cannonballs. By the time they managed to steady themselves several hundred feet away, their arms were completely blood-stained, and every single inch of skin on those arms had been torn open, while their fingers had all been snapped. At the same time, the countless streaks of invisible sword chi had already rained down upon the crimson light barrier, and within mere moments, a series of thin cracks were beginning to appear on the barrier's surface. The third elderly man was quite alarmed to see this, and he immediately injected a burst of energy into the statue that he was holding before hurriedly making a hand seal. A layer of golden light flashed above the red fox puppet, and the light barrier it had conjured up also took on a golden hue, while the cracks on its surface quickly began to mend. As such, it was able to withstand this torrential downpour of sword chi. However, even though Han Li was facing three opponents on his own, it was clear that he had gained the upper hand, and this made the three elderly men rather hesitant about how to proceed. The three of them conversed briefly through voice transmission, then slowly began to approach Han Li again, seemingly determined to target him. Han Li harumphed coldly upon seeing this, and he made a hand seal to summon his Provenance True Devil projection amid a flash of golden light. The projection then immediately fused as one with his giant ape body, following which two extra arms sprouted out of his ribs, and a pair of additional heads emerged on his shoulders. Han Li had unleashed both his 12 awakening transformations and Provenance True Devil arts at once, and the power of this form was second only to his holy nirvana physique. In the face of three Grand Ascension stage opponents, Han Li didn't dare to be too complacent. However, right as the battle was about to resume, spatial fluctuations suddenly erupted over 100 feet away, and three humanoid figures appeared in a flash. The three elderly men immediately drew to a halt as they cast their eyes toward the three new arrivals, as did Han Li. The three figures were comprised of an elderly woman, a Taoist priest, and a masked man. As soon as the three of them caught sight of Han Li, they were also quite surprised and immediately exchanged a few bewildered glances. "What a coincidence that we've arrived in the same area, Brother Zio," Han Li chuckled as the golden light around him faded, and he quickly reverted back to his human form. "What a coincidence indeed. I also didn't think that I would encounter you here, Brother Han," Zio Ming replied with a slightly forced smile, while Mistress Wan Hua and Taoist Qing Ping's hearts both sank slightly. As for the three elderly men, they didn't dare to do anything rash in this current situation, and were only appraising the three new arrivals with cold expressions. Only then did Xiao Ming turn toward the trio before asking, I don't think we've ever met before, fellow Taoists. Could it be that you're secluded cultivators of the Black Yan forest in the northwest? HMPH, you have quite a keen eye, fellow Taoist. That's right, we're the three witch spirit saints of the Black Yan forest. The elderly man who was controlling the red fox puppet harumphed coldly in response with undisguised animosity in his voice. The three witch spirit saints. That means you must be witchcraft cultivators. May I ask why you've decided to target Brother Han here? Xiao Ming asked. He hadn't witnessed the earlier clash between Han Li and the trio, but the residual spiritual chi fluctuations in the air and the confrontational stances they had adopted were clear indications of what had just happened. There are only a limited number of treasures in this heavenly cauldron palace, so everyone in here is our enemy. Why do we need a reason to target anyone? The elderly man replied. A cold look appeared on Xiao Ming's face upon hearing this. In that case, you must also view the three of us as enemies. What do you think, Brother Han? I don't mind either way. If it's a battle they want, then I'd be glad to entertain them, Han Li replied in a nonchalant manner. Xiao Ming's wariness toward Han Li only grew more pronounced upon seeing this. He then turned toward the three witch spirit saints with slightly furrowed brows. According to his original plan, he should have already reached the center of the heavenly cauldron palace or found the centrum of the restrictions here. However, the restriction in the second area they had entered was far more profound than they had expected, and they had only just managed to break out of it. As soon as they had emerged, they were met by Han Li and the three witch spirit saints, both of which were formidable foes, thereby further compounding their woes. If it were possible, he would naturally be happy to see Han Li and the three witch spirit saints engage in a fight to the death, while he and his companions continued on toward the final area. However, in this current situation, there was no way that Han Li and the three witch spirit saints would be foolish enough to do something like that. Having said that, being delayed in an impasse here wouldn't benefit any of them. They weren't the only Grand Ascension stage beings to have entered the heavenly cauldron palace. What if more people were to find this place during this delay? With that in mind, Xiao Ming said, Fellow Taoists, I'm sure all of us ventured into this palace in search for treasures, so engaging in conflict prior to finding any valuable treasures would be completely senseless. The most precious treasures are clearly in the areas beyond here, so why don't we all save our energy to search through those areas? The restrictions leading up to this point have already been very difficult to break through. Even if we use up all of our remaining time, we still may not be able to obtain the treasures we want, so we can't afford to be wasting time here. I don't care either way. As long as no one gets in my way, I have no intention of engaging in any conflict, Han Li replied with a hint of a smile. Letter 1D4 1F, letter 1D4 2B, letter 1D5 56, letter 1D5 F2, letter 1D6 04, letter 1D6 AT. Letter 1D5 54, letter 1D5 60, letter 1D4 6. The elderly man wielding the red fox puppet contemplated the situation momentarily before also nodding in response. All right, in that case, let's end things here. Immediately thereafter, the three elderly men exchanged some words through voice transmission before flying toward a certain area. Xiao Ming faltered slightly upon seeing the area they had chosen, but his expression then quickly returned to normal as he turned to Han Li with a smile. Have you also already decided on a target, Brother Han? If not, then we'll be going on ahead. I think I'll go to that area. Han Li shook his head in a nonchalant manner before beginning to point a finger toward a certain direction, but he suddenly seemed to change his mind and redirected his finger toward the area neighboring the one he was originally pointing toward. Mistress Wan Hua and Taoist Qing Ping's expression changed drastically upon seeing this. However, before they had a chance to say anything, Han Li had already plunged into the blue light barrier, encompassing that area as a streak of azure light. What do? He just chose the area that we were going to choose. Could it be that he also knows where the centrum of the heavenly cauldron palace is? Mistress Wan Hua exclaimed in an urgent manner. I don't think so. I was the only one to have received Sinheritance, so there's no way anyone else aside from me will know the exact location and method to control the palace's centrum, Taoist Qing Ping said with tightly furrowed brows. Does that mean it was a coincidence that he chose that area? That doesn't seem to be the case, either. Xiao Ming's expression darkened significantly as he recalled back to how Han Li had changed his mind at the last moment. What do we do then? Choose another area, Mistress Wan Hua asked in a frustrated manner. Chapter 2361, Blood Prison. We can't do that. There's no way to reach the centrum through the other areas. We have no choice but to follow him. Take care not to be discovered. We should still be able to enter the centrum area first while he's scouring that area for treasures, Xiao Ming decided. Looks like that's our only option. Come to think of it, the three witch spirit saints also went to quite an interesting area. That seems to the blood prison where Taoist Tian Ding sealed away several powerful enemies of his, Taoist Qing Ping said in a concerned manner. I'm aware of that, but it's not like we can do anything to prevent them from going there. There could be powerful treasures left behind by those enemies of Taoist Tian Dings in that blood prison, but they're still not as important as seizing control of the centrum, Xiao Ming said with furrowed brows. That's a real pity. According to the tomes I inherited, the enemies trapped in the blood prison possessed powers comparable to those of Taoist Tian Ding. They would have definitely already perished after all these years, but their inheritances would undoubtedly be extremely valuable as well, Taoist Qing Ping sighed in a forlorn manner. We had originally to set the blood prison as our second target. Could it be that three witch spirit saints are also aware of its existence? Mistress Wan Hua speculated with a dark expression. That's hard to say. I was the only one who received Taoist Tian Ding's inheritance, but I can't guarantee that other powerful beings of the same generation as Taoist Tian Ding didn't leave behind any leads. After all, the blood prison was something that had once been renowned throughout the entire Blood Sky continent, Taoist Qing Ping said. All right, we can't do anything about that anyway, so there's no need to speculate any further on the subject. It's about time that we continued onward, Xiao Ming said as he cast his gaze toward the area that Han Li had just entered. Mistress Wan Hua and Taoist Qing Ping naturally didn't raise any objections. Thus, the three of them also flew into the area enshrouded under the blue light barrier, except they chose an entry point that was quite far away from Han Li's. What a cold place! Han Li was hovering in the air above a glacial world that was covered by a layer of blue snow with a peculiar expression. There was a glacial aura all throughout the surrounding area, and there were even certain parts of his body where layers of blue frost had accumulated as the glacial chi had pierced through the protective spiritual light there. Ever since he had attained complete mastery over his provenance true devil arts, it was extremely rare for him to feel this cold. Judging from the glacial aura manifested by the illusion in this area, it was clear that the restriction here was far more formidable than those in the areas he had previously passed through. After hovering in the air for a long while, a layer of silver flames suddenly appeared over his body, and the bone-chilling sensation immediately faded. Han Li then slowly flew straight ahead, but after traveling for only several kilometers, fierce winds suddenly erupted in all directions, and the countless snowflakes in the air abruptly transformed into thousands of blue ice peacocks. The peacocks spread their wings, releasing countless balls of blue light in a frenzy. Han Li briefly inspected these balls of light with his spiritual sense, and his expression changed slightly as he quickly made a hand seal, upon which the layer of silver flames around him thickened by severalfold. In the next instant, the balls of light struck the silver flames in rapid succession before exploding one after another, creating a massive tornado as silver flames and blue light intertwined. Elsewhere in the same glacial area, Xiao Ming's trio had released around a dozen treasures and were locked in a fierce battle against a group of close to 20 mountainous blue giants. These giants were all able to manipulate ice and snow to conjure up armor and all types of weapons, and no matter how much damage they sustained, they were able to instantly regenerate using the ice and snow in the area, making them even more troublesome to deal with than beings with immortal bodies. Thus, even though Xiao Ming's trio was far more powerful than these giants, they were temporarily stalled. Within a massive hall that was filled with countless giant crimson pillars, the three witch spirit saints were carefully advancing while giving all of the pillars a wide berth. These pillars seemed to be quite ordinary from a distance, but at close quarters, one would discover that there were countless crimson skulls embedded onto their surfaces, and there was blood occasionally flowing down from the top of the pillars. Is this really the entrance to the blood prison, fellow Taoist Yu? The elderly man seated atop the giant centipede asked with a hint of unease in his voice. Rest assured, Brother Wu, you saw how easy it was to break through the restrictions outside this place. This indicates that the records in that ancient plaque are accurate, and that this is indeed the place where Taoist Tian Ding had imprisoned his powerful enemies. He, the most powerful being of our witch Tao, Master Tian Wu, once battled Taoist Tian Ding for 7 days and 7 nights before being defeated and imprisoned here. Otherwise, with Master Tian Wu's aptitude and powers, he would have definitely been able to ascend to the true immortal realm as well. The elderly man seated atop the black scorpion replied in a confident manner. This place really is quite unsettling, so I can see why Brother Wu is concerned. However, due to the fact that we're using witch Dao cultivation arts that are far different from normal cultivation arts, Taoist Tian Ding's inheritance may not be very useful for us. In contrast, we'll be sure to benefit immensely if we can obtain Master Tian Wu's cultivation arts and treasures from the blood prison. Perhaps we'll even have a chance of ascending to the true immortal realm in the future. As such, we have to venture into this blood prison even if there's some risk involved, the final elderly man said. Indeed, it's a pity that the stone plaque was damaged, and only the part that detailed the methods to counter the restrictions outside remained. If we knew how to counter the restrictions in here as well, then we'd have nothing to worry about, the elderly man with the Yu surname sighed. It's already a massive opportunity for us to find the exact location of the blood prison. There may be some powerful restrictions in here, but the three of us will definitely be able to break through them. The man with the Wu surname chuckled. In any case, it's too late for us to turn back now. Speaking of which, that brat with the giant ape form that we encountered outside was truly formidable. If fellow Taoist Zio and the others hadn't appeared, I really wanted to refine that brat into a blood puppet, the man with the Yu surname said. That man's giant ape form is indeed extremely powerful, but his second transformation seemed to have stemmed from some type of devilish ability. With his powers, even the three of us most likely wouldn't have been able to take him down in a short time. We intentionally put on an inhospitable display so that no one would follow us into this blood prison, and I'm sure our plan worked. The elderly man with the Wu surname chuckled coldly. That's a strategy that we devised in advance, and I'm sure it would have at least been somewhat effective. Out of all of the people currently in the Heavenly Cauldron Palace, only Zio Ming's trio can pose a substantial threat to us. Zio Mo is renowned as the deranged devil of the Blood Bone sect, and he's no ordinary Grand Ascension stage being. On top of that, he has Mistress Wan Hua and Taoist Qing Ping to assist him, so our chances of victory against them would be quite slim, the final elderly man said. No information has been transmitted to us by the spies we left behind, so it looks like Zio Ming and the others didn't follow us. They must have some other target in mind. This is great news for us. We can focus all of our attention on this blood prison now. The man with the Wu surname chuckled coldly. Just as his companions were about to respond, their three giant steeds suddenly drew to an abrupt halt as they let loose a string of sharp cries while adopting wary stances. The three elderly men's expressions changed slightly upon seeing this, and they immediately released a series of treasures to defend themselves. The trio then cast their eyes up ahead with cautious expression. What they failed to notice was that the blood pouring down the crimson pillars in the hall was gradually becoming more and more viscous, while also taking on a reddish-black color. A burst of rustling suddenly rang out up ahead, and moments later, specks of green flames appeared in the dark space up ahead, following which a series of thumb-sized skeletal butterflies emerged. These butterflies had flames burning all over their skeletal bodies, creating a very unsettling sight to behold, and there were over 10,000 of them in total. Those are bone-engulfing butterflies. Get back! The man with the Wu surname immediately exclaimed upon catching a clear glimpse of these butterflies, and his companions' faces also paled significantly upon seeing this. The three of them immediately shot back in retreat atop their respective steeds, while the swarm of butterflies followed along silently behind them. They were fleeing at over 100 times the speed that they had come, and they instantly covered a distance of several thousand feet. All of a sudden, a burst of sinister cackling rang out, and the reddish-black blood pouring down the crimson pillars converged to form a series of crimson skulls. As soon as these skulls appeared, they instantly swelled to the size of wagon wheels, before pouncing toward the three elderly men to block their path of retreat. The expressions of the man with the Wu surname darkened slightly upon seeing this, but he remained calm as he said, "Those are blood spirits formed by the blood of the powerful beings who perished in the blood prison. Brother Yu, unleash the spirit warding technique right away. The two of us will keep these bone-engulfing butterflies and blood spirits at bay for you." "All right, I'll be counting on you then, fellow Taoists," the man with the Yu surname replied as the centipede beneath him drew to a halt, and he immediately sat down onto his steed with his legs crossed. A series of dark green jade badges then flew out of his body before forming a strange formation that carried him upward. Chapter 2362, with Chapter Tao Abilities. At the same time, he began to chant an incantation, and a series of dark green spirit patterns appeared over his body before spreading at an incredible speed, covering almost every single inch of his skin before beginning to writhe and squirm as if they had sprung to life. From a distance, it looked as if countless thin green insects had appeared over the elderly man's body, presenting a very unsettling sight to behold. Right at this moment, one of the two other men released a crimson copper gong, and upon striking the gong, his head of white hair immediately stood up on end before detaching from his scalp, then transformed into countless winged white-scaled flying snakes that pounced directly toward the oncoming bone, engulfing butterflies. Letter 1D5F3, letter 1D69B, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D556, letter 1D6A0, letter 1D6AT, letter 1D6AC, letter 1D698, letter 1D426. Meanwhile, the other elderly man raised a hand to release a pristine white gourd, which tipped itself over to pour out clouds of black chi that transformed into black hands with mouths at the palms. The black hands let loose a string of sharp cries before rushing toward the skulls on the other side. Thus, four groups of extremely strange-looking creatures began to engage in fierce battles, and dull thumps indicating bodies plummeting onto the ground were ringing out incessantly. The black palms and white flying snakes seemed to be quite ferocious, but they were clearly no match for the crimson skulls and white bone butterflies, which were releasing crimson arrows and scorching green flames, respectively. It didn't take long before most of the black hands and white snakes to be eradicated, whereas only several tens of blood spirits and bone-engulfing butterflies had been destroyed. The two elderly men were looking on with pained expressions as one black hand and white snake was destroyed after another, as if they were losing something very precious to them. Soon, all of the hands and snakes were destroyed, and grim looks appeared on the faces of the two elderly men as the blood spirits and bone-engulfing butterflies began to converge toward them again. The two of them exchanged a glance, and one of them let loose a loud roar, upon which a massive octopus-like insect projection appeared behind him before instantly brandishing its dozen or so tentacles. Each tentacle was over 100 feet in length and was riddled with dark green runes, and as the tentacles swiped through the air, they were able to send all of the blood spirits that they came into contact with flying back through the air. Meanwhile, a fingernail on one of the other elderly man's hands elongated to several inches in length and became as sharp as a knife. He then swept the fingernail toward his other shoulder, instantly dismembering his own arm, which exploded into a pile of flesh that hovered before him. Immediately thereafter, he tore off his own robes to reveal 7 or 8 fierce-looking insect tattoos on his chest. The elderly man then unleashed some type of secret technique, and the tattoos sprang out of his body before transforming into giant insects that were each around 100 feet in size that devoured the pile of blood and flesh before them. A cold look flashed through his eyes, and the bodies of the giant insects twisted and warped as they began to sprout a series of silver spikes. At the same time, they began to shimmer with golden light as if they had attained Vajra bodies, and they pounced toward the bone-engulfing butterflies amid a burst of loud hissing. Every time the tentacles lashed out, the runes on their surfaces would flash incessantly, and loud thunderclaps that threatened to shatter even the space around them would ring out one after another. It was clear that these two abilities were the two elderly men's trump cards, and they were able to keep the blood spirits and bone-engulfing butterflies at bay. Meanwhile, the dark green patterns on the body of the man with the U surname converged to form an image of an 8-armed devilish creature. The image encompassed every single inch of his body, presenting a very unsettling sight to behold, as if he were wearing the skin of an azure devil. All of a sudden, he let loose a loud roar, and countless green threads erupted out of his body to form a giant cocoon all around him. The cocoon then began to revolve at a rapid speed, and a string of ghostly howls rang out from within it. Immediately thereafter, the formation below the cocoon also began to emit a loud buzzing sound while releasing clouds of dark green devilish chi. A dull thump rang out as the giant cocoon exploded, and a menacing 8-armed devil emerged. The devilish creature was extremely burly and imposing with azure skin, and it slowly opened its gleaming green eyes. At this point, the other two elderly were beginning to struggle in the face of the blood spirits and bone-engulfing butterflies. Close to half of the octopus-like insect projection's feelers had been reduced to blood by the blood spirits, while most of the giant golden insects had already been devoured by the bone-engulfing butterflies. However, both of the elderly men were ecstatic to see the emergence of the eight-armed Azure Devil, and they immediately withdrew their secret techniques before flying toward the devilish creature. Thus, the blood spirits and bone-engulfing butterflies were able to converge toward the trio from both sides before completely surrounding them. In this dire situation, the Azure Devil finally sprang into action. It lashed out with its 8 arms in unison, thrusting 4 palms toward each side. Bright golden light radiated from its 8 palms, and a golden seal text rune surfaced in each hand before instantly swelling to around 10 feet in size. The golden runes then each released a vast expanse of rainbow light, which immediately immobilized all of the blood spirits and bone-engulfing butterflies upon contact. Moments later, the rainbow light flashed, and the blood spirits and bone-engulfing butterflies were all reduced to dust as if they had encountered the bane of their existence. Within the span of just a few breaths, all of the blood spirits and bone-engulfing butterflies were completely wiped out. Immediately thereafter, the 8-armored Azure Devil's aura subsided along with the rainbow light it had released, and it slowly withdrew its 8 arms. A dull thump suddenly rang out as the Azure Devil's skin fell away from head to toe, revealing the elderly man with the U surname again. However, his face was very pale, and his aura had abated significantly, indicating that he had expended a lot of energy. It's a good thing that the 3 of us came together. Otherwise, we would have been in huge trouble, the man with the U surname said with a hint of lingering fear in his eyes. Indeed, we already knew that the restrictions leading up to the blood prison would be extremely difficult to deal with, but I didn't think that we'd encounter creatures as fearsome as blood spirits and bone-engulfing butterflies. If any one of us had come here alone, then we'd be in grave peril, the elderly man with the Wu surname agreed. Seeing as 2 types of creatures have already appeared, we should be quite close to the true entrance of the blood prison, so this is good news, the final elderly man said with a smile. I certainly hope so. Let's continue, the man with Wu's surname replied with a nod. Thus, the 3 of them began to advance onward again. Several days later, a giant golden ape with 3 heads and 6 arms was wielding a massive golden blade in each hand, while engaged in a fierce battle against 2 blue ice worms. The giant ape was over 1,000 feet tall, while the ice worms were around 5,000 to 6,000 feet in length. Their bodies were covered by translucent blue scales, and they were conjuring up violent snowstorms while releasing bursts of glacial chi that was threatening to freeze this entire space solid. The massive ape was completely unfazed by the glacial conditions, but it was clearly rather wary of the 2 ice worms' huge claws. After a few more exchanges, the giant ape suddenly let loose a thunderous roar before combining its 6 massive golden blades into one enormous blade that was over 10,000 feet in length, then sliced the 2 ice worms in half cleanly down the middle. However, the 4 remains of the 2 ice worms then transformed into 4 shorter ice worms before pouncing toward Han Li again. Right at this moment, the gigantic golden blade transformed into a sea of golden light at the giant ape's behest, then swept toward the 4 ice worms before slicing them into several tens of pieces. Blue light flashed from the remains of the ice worms, and they were about to transform into dozens of even shorter ice worms. However, before they could complete their transformation, one wave of golden light surged toward them after another, slicing them into thousands of pieces, and they finally completely disintegrated into specks of blue light. Only then did the massive ape withdraw the golden light, then quickly reverted back into its human form. The restriction here is truly quite troublesome. It's able to manifest close ice attribute creatures with powers infinitely approaching those of Grand Ascension stage beings. However, my calculations tell me that the exit should be just up ahead, Han Li murmured to himself as he flew onward through the snowstorm as a streak of golden light. All of this was only possible as he was a master of formations and possessed incredibly powerful spiritual sense. Otherwise, a normal cultivator would have already gotten completely lost in here. Around an hour later, the streak of golden light appeared in front of a stone platform enshrouded under a golden light barrier after slaying a few more powerful ice beasts. There was a small teleportation formation on the platform, and a smile appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this. However, his smile faded slightly as he swept his spiritual sense toward the golden light barrier. This is a 5-elemental astral light barrier. I won't be able to break through it in a short time through conventional means. So be it, looks like I'll have to expend some more energy than anticipated. Han Li quickly made up his mind before making a grabbing motion, and a dark green longsword appeared in his grasp amid a flash of green light. As soon the sword appeared, the world's origin chi in the nearby area immediately began to tremor slightly. Han Li gripped onto the sword and took a deep breath as bright purplish golden light erupted from his body, while the Provenance true devil projection appeared behind him. He then gently slashed the longsword toward the golden light barrier down below. Chapter 2363, Huge Plaque. The entire space seemed to dim slightly, and countless snowflakes were abruptly drawn toward the profound heavenly spirit/sword as if through a giant funnel, then vanished into the sword as the world's origin chi. A row of silver runes immediately appeared on the surface of the sword, and a streak of dark green sword chi swept forth before striking the golden light barrier. The sword chi began to glow with scintillating light, almost as if a green sun had appeared to inundate the entire light barrier. A loud buzzing sound rang out from the light barrier's surface, and countless five-colored runes appeared, only to be melted away within the green sun. Finally, a dull thump rang out, and the entire light barrier was completely eradicated. Han Li's face was slightly pale as he withdrew the green longsword, then flew into the teleportation formation on the stone platform. He then pointed a finger at the edge of the formation, casting a white incantation seal, which vanished into thin air in a flash. A dull burst of dull rumbling rang out from the entire formation, and Han Li disappeared amid a flash of white light. In the next instant, Han Li re-emerged within a murky gray space, and there was a mountainous stone plaque that extended into the heavens situated up ahead. The stone plaque was so massive that there was no end to it in sight from the bottom, and it was entirely of a translucent crimson color with countless thick silver runes etched on its surface, presenting a very mysterious sight to behold. Han Li looked at the stone plaque, then inspected the murky gray space around him, and a hint of befuddlement appeared in his eyes. No matter how he looked at it, this place had nothing to do with the palace cluster he had seen from outside the light barrier. It seemed that he had been teleported into an unfamiliar place from the restriction in the last area. At the same time, Xiao Ming's trio also finally emerged from the glacial restriction, and they were greeted by the sight of a golden palace and rows of silver pavilions that resembled an immortal paradise, but all of them wore dark expressions. This isn't where the centrum of the Heavenly Cauldron Palace is situated. According to the records on the tome I inherited, the teleportation formation that we found earlier should have taken us directly to the centrum area. Why were we teleported here instead? Taoist Qing Ping murmured to himself in a puzzled manner. The records on the tome were definitely accurate. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to make it all the way here. Some type of unforeseen change must have taken place in the restriction in the last area to result in this, Xiao Ming analyzed. What kind of unforeseen change could there have been? Are you saying the restriction can mutate on its own? Mistress Wan Hua was approaching her wits' end. That's hard to say. Taoist Tian Ding's formation mastery is far beyond what we can comprehend, and the Heavenly Cauldron Palace has existed for so many years, so it wouldn't be too surprising if the restrictions within the palace had undergone some type of change. Having said that, the restrictions in all the other areas had remained unchanged, yet this one has been altered. That's too suspicious to be a coincidence. I think this is a result of someone tampering with the restriction in that area, Xiao Min speculated. How is that possible? Aside from that human, no one would have been able to enter that area earlier than us. Even if someone had entered that area before all of us, there's no way they could have been able to alter such a complex giant restriction in such a short time, Mistress Wan Hua countered. You seem to have forgotten about the people who entered the Heavenly Cauldron Palace during its last opening. Those people weren't powerful, but there were quite a few of them who possessed true keys. Back when the Heavenly Cauldron Palace was closed, I don't recall many of them returning alive, Xiao Ming said. Taoist Qing Ping's expression changed slightly upon hearing this. So you're saying there are still survivors from the last group of people to have entered the Heavenly Cauldron Palace, and that someone among them altered this restriction. That should be the case. Otherwise, there's no way to explain all of this, Xiao Ming replied. Generally speaking, this wouldn't be possible. Upon closure of the Heavenly Cauldron Palace, everyone would be automatically evicted, and those who forcibly stayed behind using secret techniques would be killed by the restrictions in the palace. Having said that, if there were someone even more powerful than Taoist Tian Ding had been, they would have been able to resist the restrictions in the palace. Perhaps they've already entered the centrum area and obtained the Taoist Tian Ding's full inheritance. In that case, they'd be able to stay in the Heavenly Cauldron Palace, and it would be a simple matter for them to change the exit of a certain area. If that's what we're dealing with here, then that would be very bad news, Taoist Qing Ping said with a concerned expression. Letter 1D5F3, letter 1D69B, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D556, letter 1D568, letter 1D556, letter 1D5F0, letter 1D5FC, letter 1D55E. The Heavenly Cauldron Palace was constructed directly prior to Taoist Tian Ding's ascension, so it's next to impossible that an entrant to the palace would be even more powerful than Taoist Tian Ding himself. And it's also very unlikely that someone has already seized control of the centrum or taken Taoist Tian Ding's full inheritance. Otherwise, the entire palace would have already been taken rather than appearing here on schedule as it did, Xiao Ming analyzed. Mistress Wan Hua's eyes immediately lit up upon hearing this. In that case, the person who remained in the Heavenly Cauldron Palace should only be able to control part of the Heavenly Cauldron Palace's restrictions, and they haven't gained complete control over the centrum, nor Taoist Tian Ding's full inheritance. That's most likely the case, Xiao Ming replied in a confident manner. In that case, we still have great chances. However, seeing as the route detailed in the tome is no longer reliable, we'll have to use the brute force method to access the centrum by forcing our way through another light barrier in this area. According to the records, the centrum should be situated in a tall pagoda that resembles a giant stone plaque. Taoist Qing Ping revealed as a hint of elation appeared on his face. The restriction in the last area already took us so long to break through. Will we have enough time to go through it again? Won't the delay be too significant? Mistress Wan Hua asked in a hesitant manner. We're already familiar with the restriction, so it should take us far less time to traverse through it the second time around. If worse comes to worst, we'll just have to employ some special methods to conserve as much time as possible, Xiao Ming said. Mistress Wan Hua and Taoist Qing Ping both nodded in agreement. Thus, the three of them set off toward the light barrier that was barely visible in the distance, paying no heed to the golden palace and silver pavilions right before their eyes. Henley flew a lap around the giant stone plaque, but was unable to find any entrance, and he returned to his starting point with his brows slightly furrowed. All of a sudden, he swept a sleeve through the air to release a small white vial within a ball of white light. The surface of the vial was extremely smooth, and it was close to completely transparent with a ball of crimson light flashing incessantly within it. Who would have thought that fellow Taoist Ice Soul's true body would actually be trapped here? If it weren't for the slight reaction displayed by this vial in the last area, I would have missed her, Han Li murmured to himself, then began to fly up along the side of the stone plaque while continuing to make laps around it. After flying for close to 20 laps, the ball of crimson light within the small vial suddenly brightened ever so slightly. This change was almost undetectable to the naked eye, but Han Li was able to notice it right away. Thus, he immediately drew to a halt before flying directly toward the stone plaque, before stopping again in front of several lines of huge silver runes. Beveled silver text, this might stump someone else but to me, he. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face as he carefully inspected the lines of runes, then pointed a finger toward them a few times. The silver runes flashed slightly before converging and fusing as one to form an even larger silver rune, which began to revolve on the spot on its own. A black passageway was then suddenly opened up on the seemingly solid surface of the plaque. Han Li immediately flew into the passageway, upon which it quickly closed again. After landing on a patch of smooth ground, Han Li made a grabbing motion before hurling a white ball of light through the air, instantly illuminating the dark passageway so that it was as bright as day. He quickly inspected his surroundings to discover that this was a semicircular passageway, and the floor and walls were all lined with ordinary slabs of bluestone. However, there were some unidentifiable bright red spirit patterns etched onto the surface of this material, and those patterns were giving off a faint bloody odor. Han Li withdrew his gaze before releasing his enormous spiritual sense, and after just a brief moment, he heaved a slightly resigned sigh. As expected, spiritual sense was significantly more restricted in here than outside, and the flight restriction in this passageway was so powerful that even he could only hover a small distance above the ground. On top of that, the amount of magic power expenditure required to maintain flight also far exceeded that of normal flight restrictions. As expected of someone who had successfully ascended, the restrictions left behind by Taoist Tian Ding were truly remarkable. After a brief moment of contemplation, Han Li strode forward and began to run at full speed. With his incredibly powerful physical body, His running speed was no slower than the flight speed of average Grand Ascension cultivators. There were no immediate dangers here, so there was naturally no need for him to maintain flight. However, after only advancing for a short distance, the passageway began to gradually slope upward. A short while later, Han Li was already situated over 1,000 feet higher than his starting point. All of a sudden, a bright light appeared up ahead, indicating the presence of an exit. Han Li's eyes narrowed slightly, and he didn't pause even for a moment as he continued onward. However, as soon as he emerged into the giant hall beyond the passageway, he was rooted to the spot by what he saw. Chapter 2364, Metal Cave. The hall was around 300 to 400 feet tall, and its area exceeded 1,000 acres. However, what should have been a flat and smooth bluestone floor was riddled with pits and craters, as well as the remains of countless treasures. There were also sections of the ground that were charred black, and at the center of the hall was a massive beastly skeleton. The skeleton was as translucent as jade, and it resembled the skeleton of both a crocodile and a worm. It seemed that someone had engaged in a fierce battle with the massive beast here, but judging from these residual traces, the battle had taken place a very long time ago. Han Li appraised the beastly skeleton briefly with an intrigued expression, and judging from its residual aura, he was able to immediately identify the skeleton to have belonged to a beast at the pinnacle of the body integration stage. The fact that such a fierce battle had been waged against a mere body integration stage beast indicated that its opponents were definitely below the Grand Ascension stage, but they wouldn't have been too weak either. Looking at the remains of the treasures on the ground, Han Li could tell that the giant beast had most likely had around 4 to 5 opponents. After inspecting the area for a while longer, Han Li suddenly cast his gaze toward a wooden shelf in the corner of the hall. This was a black shelf that was around 20 to 30 feet long, with around a dozen silver platters of different sizes positioned on it in 2 rows. However, the platters were all empty, and their contents had clearly already been taken by someone. Thus, Han Li didn't hesitate any longer as he made his way directly toward the exit on the other side of the hall. The same azure passageway resumed, and on this occasion, it took Han Li quite a while to finally emerge on the other side. In doing so, he arrived in a space that was several times bigger than even the hall from before. There were a few white clouds drifting in the air up above, and the ground was comprised of fine white sand. At the center of this space stood a triangular monastery-like building. Han Li took a glance at the building before flipping a hand over to summon the small vial. The ball of crimson light in the vial didn't display any reaction, and his brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, but he still made his way toward the gate of the monastery, which was already wide open. The 3 witch spirit saints were standing before a sea of black mist that stretched as far as the eyes could see. The mist was surging violently as if it were a living creature, occasionally releasing gusts of glacial yin winds alongside blood-curdling howls. The 3 of them were looking very exhausted, and their auras had diminished even further. Even the 3 giant steeds beneath them had already vanished, but they were all looking into the sea of mist with excitement in their eyes. This was because there was a crimson pavilion situated within the sea of mist. The pavilion was over 1,000 feet tall with countless crimson runes etched onto its surface, and at the very top were the words "Blood Prison" in 2 huge silver ancient characters. "So this is the Blood Prison. It's a little different from how I envisioned," the elderly man with the U surname remarked. "This is most likely an illusion. Let me try and dispel it," the elderly man with the U surname replied. Immediately thereafter, he swept a sleeve through the air to release an azure wooden badge with a black ghostly head embedded onto it, then made a hand seal before pointing a finger at the badge. The badge instantly swelled to around the size of a human head, and azure runes began to appear on its surface. At the same time, the ghostly head also opened its eyes and mouth. A pillar of azure light erupted out of the ghostly head's mouth before transforming into a massive pillar of azure wind that vanished into the sea of mist in a flash. In the next instant, a burst of loud rumbling rang out, and all of the nearby mist was swept away by the fierce azure winds, opening up a clear passageway. The 3 witch spirit saints peered carefully into the passageway. Upon their expressions all changed slightly. Beneath the passageway was a giant lake filled with viscous crimson water, and there were countless thumb-sized white maggot-like insects swimming along the lake's surface, sending chills running down the onlooker's spine. Is this the true appearance of the Blood Prison? Could this be an illusion as well? The elderly man with the Yu surname asked in a stunned manner. No illusion could maintain itself in the face of my azure astral winds. The man with the Wu surname replied before opening his mouth to release several balls of energy into the azure wooden badge. The wind surging out of the ghostly head's mouth immediately became over 10 times as powerful, and one pillar of wind was being released after another. A short while later, most of the sea of mist had been dispelled, thereby revealing most of the crimson lake. The three elderly men cast their eyes downward, upon which elated looks appeared in their eyes. Aside from the countless maggots on the lake's surface, around a dozen black metal cages of different sizes had also been revealed. The smallest of these cages were only around 10 feet tall, while the largest ones were over 10,000 feet in size. Their surfaces were riddled with unidentifiable golden runes, and there were countless sharp crimson spikes extending into the cage, presenting a menacing sight to behold. Most of the cage's doors were already wide open, with only a few that were still seamless and unopened, and within each of those unopened cages was a corpse in different poses. These beings had clearly perished countless years ago, and all of them had vastly differing bone structures, but their residual auras still struck the three witch spirit saints with a sense of apprehension. These must be the enemies sealed here by Taoist Tian Ding. As expected, all of them were extremely powerful. We'll have to examine these bodies carefully to see which one belongs to Master Tian Wu, the final elderly man said with excitement in his eyes. Master Tian Wu was a practitioner of witch Dao cultivation arts, so his remains are definitely different from the others. We'll be able to easily identify it once we get a little closer, the elderly man with the Wu surname replied. The other bodies all belong to extremely powerful beings as well, so they're definitely carrying formidable treasures. We can't just leave them, the elderly man with the Yu surname said with a hint of greed and urgency in his eyes. Of course. However, our main objective is Master Tian Wu, so let's obtain his inheritance first before we think about anything else, the elderly man with the Wu surname decided. The other two elderly men felt this to be a reasonable suggestion, and they each released several protective treasures before flying directly toward the black metal cage that was closest to them. This crimson lake was extremely unsettling, so the three of them naturally didn't dare to take any chances. Much to their surprise and elation, the lake remained completely calm and placid even as they reached the metal cage. The body in the cage was far more petite than that of a normal person, and after carefully examining it with their spiritual sense, all of them shook their heads before flying toward another metal cage. The second corpse wasn't the one they were searching for, either, and before they knew it, they had reached the center of the entire lake, arriving at the fourth metal cage. In contrast with the previous three, this metal cage was one of the largest on the entire lake, standing at 5,000 to 6,000 feet tall. Aside from the sharp spikes extending inward, there was also an extremely long crimson chain that was bound countless times around the body inside. The chain itself was in rather bad condition. Not only was its surface riddled with rust, there were even some cracks that were visible, and it seemed that the body had struggled violently for some time prior to its passing. The corpse in the cage belonged to a horse-human hybrid creature, and every single one of its bones was of a translucent green color with faint traces of golden light flowing through them. The upper body of this creature was completely identical to that of a normal human, except it was extremely massive, while its lower body was close to 1,000 feet in length, and the four giant hooves of the corpse were the only parts where some silver fur remained. There's no mistaking it, this is Senior Tian Wu's body. The elderly man with the Yu surname immediately concluded upon sensing the fearsome aura emanating from the body. This is indeed a witch Dao aura, as expected of Master Tian Wu to have retained such a powerful aura this many years after his death. The final elderly man also chimed in an excited manner. In contrast, the elderly man with the Wu surname was looking on with slightly furrowed brows. Where is Master Tian Wu's inheritance? His words acted as a reminder to his two companions, and only then did they discover that there seemed to be nothing else in the cage aside from the giant corpse. All of a sudden, one of the elderly men's eyes lit up, and he suddenly pointed toward a certain part of the giant body. What's that? The other two hurriedly directed their attention to the same spot, upon which they discovered that there was a black shadow embedded onto one of the corpse's massive ribs. Upon closer inspection, this seemed to be a black jade slip. These are definitely the remains of Master Tian Wu, so let's break open this cage first, the elderly man with the Yu surname suggested. His two companions naturally had no objection, and thus, the treasures they had summoned were sent flying directly toward the metal cage with tremendous force. A resounding boom rang out, and scintillating golden light erupted from the metal cage, while the cage itself only tremored slightly before the light faded, and everything returned to normal. The elderly man with the Wu surname focused his gaze onto the cage, upon which his expression immediately darkened slightly. Not a single trace had been left on the surface of the cage. "Let me have another go," the elderly man with the Yu surname said as a fierce look appeared in his eyes, and he made a grabbing motion to summon a short crimson sword with countless spirit insect images etched onto its surface. Letter 1D557, letter 1D563, letter 1D41E, letter 1D41E, letter 1D604, letter 1D41E, letter 1D680, letter 1D560, letter 1D696. There was also a pristine white thumb-sized crystal embedded into the hilt of the sword, and he gripped onto the sword before suddenly slicing off several fingers from his other hand. He then began to chant something while pointing toward a certain patch of space, and the severed fingers immediately disintegrated into bursts of blood mist that flowed into the short sword. Chapter 2365, Carcass. The short sword began to emit a buzzing sound, while the images of the insects began to roam over the sword's blade as if they had sprung to life. The elderly man with the Yu surname swept an arm through the air, and the short sword immediately hurtled toward the metal cage as a streak of crimson light. As soon as the streak of crimson light struck the cage, countless arcs of golden lightning erupted amid a loud thunderclap. The crimson light was immediately repelled, then returned to the elderly man's hand as a short sword again. "This is divine devilbane lightning." The elderly man was stunned to see this, and he hurriedly examined the short sword to find that several thin cracks had appeared on its surface, indicating that it had suffered severe damage. If Han Li were present, he would also be stunned to see this. The golden lightning that had erupted from the metal cage did indeed appear to be rather similar to divine devilbane lightning, but upon closer inspection, one would discover that it was different. The lightning was also of a shimmering golden color, but it was intermingled with purplish golden runes, and it was far more powerful than Han Li's divine devilbane lightning. "It really is divine devilbane lightning. Wait, no, it doesn't seem to be ordinary divine devilbane lightning. I recall that Taoist Tian Ding had mastered several types of lightning, as well as an ability that allowed him to refine and purify lightning, and this ability could increase the power of lightning abilities by over tenfold," the final elderly man said with furrowed brows. "That's a huge problem. Divine devilbane lightning is extremely effective against witch Dao abilities to begin with. How are we going to counter this purified divine devilbane lightning?" the elderly man with the Yu surname asked as he stowed his short sword away. The sword didn't appear to be all that remarkable, but it actually possessed several incredible abilities, so he was extremely frustrated that it had been damaged here. "Rest assured, no matter how powerful this divine devilbane lightning is, it's not being wielded by anyone, so dispelling it will only be a matter of time. There's definitely more than just one restriction on this cage, and the latter restrictions will most likely be even more difficult to counter. That's what I'm most worried about," the elderly man with the Wu surname said as he appraised the sharp spikes on the cage and the crimson chain binding the corpse. "No matter how difficult it's going to be, we have to succeed. Otherwise, our efforts up to this point would all be wasted. Let me see if my infernal yin water will be able to dispel this divine devilbane lightning," the final elderly man said before opening his mouth to release a gray gourd. He then pointed a finger at the gourd, and it tipped itself over to pour out a wave of inky black water. The water seemed to possess incredible glacial powers, and as soon as it emerged, the air temperature plummeted drastically. At the same time, wisps of gray chi began to spread through the air, releasing a rotten odor. The black water swirled around up above at the elderly man's behest, transforming into a black worm before pouncing viciously toward the cage. Countless golden runes appeared once again on the surface of the cage amid a loud thunderclap, and another shimmering golden lightning net emerged. The black water and golden lightning immediately clashed amid a resounding boom. Han Li was standing in a massive hall with a contemplative look on his face, appraising an extremely lifelike statue situated on an altar up ahead. The statue was around the same size as an actual person, and it depicted a middle-aged Taoist priest in a set of white Taoist robes with a crimson longsword slung diagonally across his back. The statue's gaze was directed diagonally forward, and it wore an indifferent expression. On either side of this statue was a giant azure falcon statue and a silver praying mantis statue, both of which were also extremely lifelike and menacing to behold. This should be Taoist Tianding. I can't think of anyone else with such a graceful bearing, Han Li murmured to himself before inspecting his surroundings to find 4 crimson-armored puppets, each of which was around 20 feet tall, lying on the ground in a lopsided manner, as well as 2 unidentifiable corpses. The 4 puppets were completely still, but their suits of armor were giving off a bright sheen, and they were completely undamaged, as were the weapons that they were wielding, making it seem as if they could spring back to life at any moment. As for the 2 corpses, one was missing half of its body with 4 black flying swords snapped into over 10 pieces littered all around it. The other corpse was missing its head, and there was a broken purple shield and a short silver ruler that had been completely twisted lying beside it. The 2 corpses were each situated between 2 puppets, and judging from the state that they were in, it seemed that they had perished in battle against these puppets. Judging from the residual auras of these corpses, they had most likely been among the people who had battled the giant beast in the hall on the first floor. Han Li carefully inspected the 2 corpses several times, but didn't find any other treasures. Thus, he abruptly vanished on the spot before appearing behind the statue of Taoist Tianding. There was a damaged small formation behind the statue, at the center of which was a white stone platform with a diameter of around 10 feet. There were several indentations of different shapes on the platform, seemingly to accommodate certain items, but the items within those slots had already been taken. At the edge of the formation were 2 more corpses lying side by side on the ground, and one of them was wearing a suit of shattered silver armor with a bony hand piercing straight through its dantian. As for the other corpse, it was clothed in a green robe and completely inky black in color, seemingly having perished after being afflicted by some type of lethal poison. On this occasion, Han Li only took a glance at the 2 corpses before sweeping a hand through the air, upon which 4 storage bracelets of different colors emerged before flying into his grasp with unerring accuracy. Han Li briefly inspected the contents of the storage bracelets with his spiritual sense before calmly stowing them away, then began to inspect the damaged formation. This is a teleportation formation. After a brief inspection, Han Li immediately discovered what this formation was, but unfortunately, it was a disposable formation that was already completely destroyed, and even with his mastery in the art of formations, he wouldn't be able to repair it in a short time. After walking several laps around the formation, Han Li suddenly raised an eyebrow before stopping at a dark red indentation on the formation. He made a grabbing motion toward the slot, and a small ball of extremely feeble crimson light emerged, looking as if it could be snuffed out at any moment. He then flipped a hand over to produce the small vial that contained the blood soul's blood essence, and as soon as the small vial appeared, the ball of crimson light immediately flew toward it before vanishing into the vial in a flash. As a result, the crimson light within the small vial glowed slightly brighter than before. As expected, this is a drop of fellow Taoist Ice Soul's blood essence. It seemed that she passed through here and used this teleportation formation, Han Li murmured to himself as a faint smile appeared on his face, and he cast his gaze toward the damaged formation again. He swept a sleeve through the air to release a string of formation treasures, as well as around a dozen fist-sized crystals of different colors, all of which hovered in midair around the formation. He then pointed a finger toward the formation, and a thin azure thread that was several feet in length shot out of his fingertip before quickly repairing the damaged spirit patterns on the formation. It would be impossible to completely restore the formation, but with Han Li's mastery in the art of formations, restoring around 70% to 80% of the formation would be enough for him to use it. A day later, a burst of astonishing energy fluctuations erupted from the Crimson Lake, and a black monster with the head of a deer and the body of a human suddenly appeared amid a burst of spatial fluctuations. It then slashed the giant silver blade it was wielding viciously downward, and a sharp screeching sound rang out as wisps of green chi surged out of the silver blade, forming a series of balls of green light. The nearby space immediately began to warp and twist in the wake of the giant blade, as if it were about to be sliced apart. Another earth-shattering boom rang out, and a scintillating green sun erupted beneath the blade before expanding further and further. A devastatingly destructive aura surged forth in all directions in a frenzy, forcing back the water in the lake to expose a section of the lake bed with a diameter of around half a kilometer, revealing countless white skeletons. All of a sudden, a bolt of silver lightning as thick as a water tank flashed through the sky, and dark clouds suddenly converged before blood began to rain down from the heavens, encompassing the entire crimson lake down below. Only after the green sun faded was the scene down below revealed. Currently, the three witch spirit saints were hovering in midair, and each of them was holding a statue that was around a foot tall and completely identical to that deer-human hybrid creature. A huge gash that was over 100 feet in length had been inflicted onto the top of the giant metal cage before them. The elderly man with the U surname chortled with glee upon seeing this. "Ha, we've finally managed to break this cage open. What are you waiting for, fellow Taoists? Let's go in together." He then stowed the statue in his hand away, before flying toward the gash on the metal cage as a streak of green light. The other two elderly men also flew into the cage in a flash with excited expressions. As for the deer-human hybrid beast, it remained hovering in the air above the cage in a stationary manner. The three elderly men re-emerged over 100 feet in the air above the carcass of the horse-human hybrid creature, and they were carefully appraising the chained carcass with elated looks in their eyes. Chapter 2366, Baleful Blood Corpse. However, the three of them were very cautious, and instead of landing beside the body right away, they exchanged a few wary glances before the elderly man with the Wu surname carefully flicked a ball of black light toward the corpse down below. Much to their surprise, as soon as the ball of black light fell upon the long crimson chain, it immediately burst into flames, and within the span of just a few breaths, the chain had been incinerated into ashes. In contrast, the corpse was completely unaffected by the black flames, retaining its smooth and pristine appearance. The three elderly men were ecstatic to see this, and the man with the Wu surname immediately snuffed out his black flames. He then drifted over to the part of the corpse that he had been examining earlier. Sure enough, there was an indistinct jade slip-like shadow at the center of that rib. His two companions also drifted down from above with excited expressions. "Can you identify what this thing is?" The elderly man with the Wu surname asked with slightly furrowed brows after praising the black shadow for a short while. Letter 1D5F3, letter 1D69B, letter 1D68T, letter 1D68, letter 1D604, letter 1D556, letter 1D5F0, letter 1D560, letter 1D46. "I'm afraid not. There's some type of power in Master Tian Wu's bones that can disrupt spiritual sense. As soon as my spiritual sense seeps into the bone, it's immediately dispelled, so I'm unable to identify what that object is," the elderly man with the U surname replied in a slightly frustrated manner. "My spiritual sense is far inferior to yours, so there's no way I'd be able to identify the object if even you're unable to," the final elderly man sighed. "Regardless of what it is, it was left behind by Master Tian Wu, so it most likely has something to do with his inheritance. Everything will be made clear to us once we secure the object," the elderly man with the U surname said. Before his companions had a chance to reply, he summoned a thin white bone sword in his hand amid a flash of white light, then slashed it viciously toward the black shadow. The bone sword struck the rib amid a dull thump, only for the enormous power imbued within the sword to completely vanish in an instant. The sword was then repelled by a burst of tremendous force, and it hadn't even left a scratch on the rib's surface. Not only were the three witch spirit saints not disheartened by this, they were all ecstatic to see this. The fact that even the remains of Master Tian Wu were this powerful was sufficient testament to just how formidable the cultivation arts he had used would have been. This made the three witch spirit saints even more eager to obtain his inheritance. "It looks like we won't be able to break through this rib using normal treasures, but if we use anything more powerful than this underworld bone sword, we run the risk of destroying the item inside the rib. As a safety precaution, I'll extract it using a secret technique," the elderly man with the Wu surname decided. The expression of the elderly man with the U surname changed slightly upon hearing this. "You're going to use the penetration technique." "Only by using that technique can I extract the item without damaging this body," the elderly man with the Wu surname replied. "But using that technique requires a massive amount of magic power expenditure, and you've already used up a lot of energy. Will you be able to execute the technique successfully?" the final elderly man asked in a concerned manner. "Rest assured, I wouldn't be suggesting this if I couldn't do it. Even if I were to fail, it still wouldn't be too late to resort to more violent tactics." The other two elderly men, naturally, couldn't say anything further upon hearing this. Thus, the elderly man with the Wu surname summoned a red pill before swallowing it, then sat down to meditate. After a while, a hint of color returned to his face as he stood up again, and at this point, his slightly feeble aura had recovered significantly. He cast his gaze toward the black shadow within the rib, then began to make a rapid string of hand seals while chanting a profound incantation. The other two elderly men looked on from the side with solemn expressions as the chanting grew louder and louder, and the world's origin chi nearby began to tremor and pulse in a peculiar rhythmic manner. Immediately thereafter, a series of unidentifiable white runes appeared around the elderly man with the Wu surname, and they also began to tremor rhythmically while emitting a faint buzzing sound. He then ceased making hand seals before slowly reaching a hand out toward the black shadow. Right at this moment, the white runes nearby abruptly turned transparent, and the elderly man's outstretched hand also became completely translucent. As soon as his transparent fingers came into contact with the bone, it passed directly through as if it had no substantial form, reaching directly for the black shadow inside. This seemingly simple maneuver was whittling down his magic power at an incredible rate, and within mere moments, sweat was pouring down his face, which had turned completely pale. Finally, he locked his fingers around the black shadow before withdrawing his hand at a speed far slower than when it had reached into the bone. Just as all of the transparent runes were beginning to flash erratically, he finally withdrew his hand out of the bone, and it returned to its normal state. Almost at the exact same moment, all of the nearby runes exploded on their own amid a dull thump. The elderly man with the Wu surname was drenched in sweat at this point, but he wore an ecstatic expression. The other two elderly men were also ecstatic, and the one with the Yu surname hurriedly urged, "Let us have a look, Brother Wu. We have to see if this jade slip contains Master Tian Wu's cultivation art inheritance." The elderly man with the Wu surname offered no reply, but he took a deep breath before raising his hand and slowly opening his fingers, revealing an inky black jade badge that was riddled with spirit patterns. The elderly man with the Yu surname faltered slightly upon seeing this, but before he had a chance to react, the elderly man with the Wu surname suddenly hurled the jade badge high up into the air as his expression changed drastically. At the same time, he shot back in retreat just as the jade badge exploded, sending countless black runes surging through the air in all directions. As soon as the runes came into contact with the giant corpse down below, they burrowed their way into the bones with all their might as if they had sprung to life. The three witch spirit saints had naturally all taken evasive measures, but they were too close to the jade badge during its explosion, and some of the black runes managed to burrow into their bodies in a flash, completely disregarding their protective spiritual light. The three elderly men were extremely alarmed by this, and they immediately unleashed their most powerful defensive treasures and abilities to protect themselves. However, regardless of what they did, all three of them plummeted out of the sky in the next instant before landing heavily on the giant body down below. At this point, black lines had appeared all over their bodies, covering virtually every single inch of their skin. Their physical bodies and true essence all became extremely numb, and there were even black threads binding around the nascent souls within their bodies, thereby completely immobilizing them. This was naturally an extremely alarming turn of events for the three witch spirit saints. Right at this moment, the black runes also began to spread over the entire giant corpse nearby as countless black lines. Yet just as the black lines were about to cover the entire body, two specks of green light suddenly appeared within the corpse's empty eye sockets. The specks of green light then transformed into two balls of scorching green flames, and at the same time, a crimson light barrier appeared over the entire massive corpse, then transformed into countless crimson threads that also vanished into its body in a flash. In the next instant, the red and black threads intertwined and began to writhe violently while devouring one another as if they were sworn enemies. As a result, black and red light began to flash erratically over the entire corpse. That thing's transforming into a baleful blood corpse. That jade slip isn't Master Tian Wu's inheritance. It's a restriction badge used by Taoist Tian Ding to repress this transformation. The final elderly man exclaimed as his face completely paled upon seeing this. The other two elderly men also began to panic as they tried to draw upon their magic power with all their might. But those black threads had already adhered tightly to all parts of their meridians, thereby preventing them from being able to unleash any abilities or secret techniques. All of a sudden, a strange cry rang out from within the giant corpse's cavernous mouth, and the green flames within its eye sockets flashed as its body began to tremor slightly. At the same time, the crimson threads within its body became several times thicker, destroying all of the black threads before devouring them. The black threads within the corpse began to recede at a rapid rate discernible even to the naked eye, and the giant corpse laid a hand onto the ground before supporting itself up into a sitting position amid a burst of loud rumbling. The three witch spirit saints were petrified upon seeing this. Under normal circumstances, the three of them wouldn't have to fear this baleful blood corpse, but in their current states, they were essentially sitting ducks waiting to be slaughtered. Right as the baleful blood corpse was about to destroy the restriction left behind by Taoist Tian Ding, the three elderly men finally sprang into action. Two of them let loose loud roars as their heads exploded in unison, and a miniature humanoid figure flew out of each of their bodies within a cloud of mist. As for the final elderly man, green light flashed within his eyes, and green runes appeared all over his skin, following which countless vines and branches erupted out of his body in a frenzy, instantly transforming him into a massive tree creature that was over 100 feet tall. Chapter 2367, Fall of the Three Saints. As soon as the tree creature took shape, it immediately regained some ability to move, and it flailed its limbs violently through the air as a burst of shockwaves surged through its body to shatter part of the black threads. It then strode forward as a cloud of mist emerged beneath its feet, carrying it up into the sky. The baleful blood corpse formed by Master Tian Wu's remains had been moving quite sluggishly up to this point, but it suddenly reached out like lightning with both hands, releasing countless crimson threads that intertwined to form a lethal net. The tree creature had only just risen up into the air when its body was sliced into countless pieces by the net. A burst of green chi emerged from the remains of the tree creature, transforming into a faint green shadow that covered a distance of over 200 feet in a flash. Yet right as it was about to catch up to the two miniature figures up ahead, the giant corpse suddenly opened its mouth to release a burst of dazzling crimson light. The space around the green shadow abruptly tightened, and a burst of incredible powerful suction force erupted behind it. It only had a chance to let loose an anguished cry before it was dragged down into the corpse's mouth by the crimson light and quickly devoured, unable to offer any resistance. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the nascent souls of the remaining two elderly men rushed out of the metal cage, then turned around just in time to see the demise of their companion. The two of them were furious to see this, and one of the nascent souls rubbed its hands together to summon a ball of black flames, which then transformed into a giant black scorpion projection. The nascent soul then made a hand seal and was about to send the projection flying into the cage when the other nascent soul suddenly grabbed onto its arm. That type of attack won't do anything. We've lost our physical bodies and expended too much energy. There's no way we'll be able to do anything to this baleful blood corpse. Our top priority now should be to escape. Otherwise, all three of us will perish here. As soon as the nascent soul's voice trailed off, the metal cage down below tremored violently, and the giant corpse stood up on one leg in a shaky manner before directing its fiery green eyes toward the two nascent souls outside. At this point, most of the black threads within the corpse's body had already been devoured, and there was only a small portion left in its other leg, continuing to struggle against the crimson threads. Both of the nascent souls shuddered involuntarily at the sight of the corpse's menacing gaze, and the first nascent soul gritted its teeth as it withdrew its giant scorpion projection. "You're right, Brother Wu. Let's go." "You've made a wise decision, Brother Yu. As long as we're still alive, we'll be able to take our revenge eventually," the other nascent soul said. All of a sudden, the corpse within the metal cage let loose a bone-chilling roar, and its other leg swayed as it slowly began to stand up straight. The nascent souls didn't dare to linger any longer upon seeing this, and they immediately flew away as two streaks of light, one azure and one white. The two nascent souls quickly rushed all the way to the edge of the Crimson Lake, and they were just about to escape from this area when a burst of rumbling suddenly rang out up ahead, following which a vast expanse of crimson light surged toward them without any warning. The two nascent souls were quite alarmed to see this, and they hurriedly drew to a halt before exchanging a quick glance. One of them then made a hand seal to summon its black scorpion projection again, while the other opened its mouth to release a small azure bell and a white bone shield. The crimson light appeared to be extremely far away, but it reached them in a flash, following which 5 identical young men emerged. "You're the 5 Zuhi clones," one of the nascent souls exclaimed. Why are you here? Have you been following us this entire time, waiting for an opportunity to ambush us? The other nascent soul asked as a hint of killing intent flashed through its eyes. However, the 5 young men remained still on the spot with wooden expressions, as if they couldn't hear what was being said to them. The 2 nascent souls both faltered slightly upon hearing this, and only then did they begin to carefully inspect the 5 Zuhi clones, upon which they finally discovered that there was something amiss. The 5 Zuhi clones all had crimson light flashing within their eyes, and their smooth skin had become dried and withered. At the same time, they were giving off a rank rotten odor. A thought immediately occurred to the 2 nascent souls upon seeing this, and their expressions darkened significantly. After exchanging a brief glance with one another, the 2 nascent souls immediately began to slowly retreat, opening up some distance between themselves and the 5 Zuhi clones. Where are you going, fellow Taoists? You've already lost your physical bodies, so why not hand over your nascent souls for my consumption? A sinister voice suddenly rang out nearby, following which a murky crimson figure emerged above the 5 Zuhi clones amid a burst of spatial fluctuations. Do you really think we're completely at your mercy just because we've lost our physical bodies? One of the nascent souls replied in an enraged voice. Perhaps I wouldn't be able to capture the 2 of you on my own, but with these 5 blood puppets, it'll be a simple task. The crimson figure chuckled coldly before making a hand seal, and a burst of loud rumbling rang out from all directions as countless crimson clouds suddenly took shape without any warning, surrounding the pair of nascent souls, as well as the crimson shadow and the 5 Zuhi clones. The mysterious crimson figure then pounced toward the 2 nascent souls with a triumphant smile on his face. Meanwhile, the 5 Zuhi clones each released a streak of sword chi that was over 100 feet in length, which swept toward the 2 nascent souls with ferocious might. The pair of nascent souls naturally unleashed different treasures and abilities to defend themselves, but they were immediately forced onto the back foot, and a hint of despair appeared in their eyes. Having lost their physical bodies, they definitely wouldn't be able to last too long, and being captured was only a matter of time. Sure enough, a short while later, the crimson figure was examining several new treasures that he was holding with a pleased expression, and the crimson light emanating from his body had become noticeably denser. All of a sudden, a thunderous roar rang out from the center of the crimson lake. That's a baleful blood corpse. He, I only intended to obtain Taoist Tian Ding's inheritance, who would have thought that I would encounter a baleful blood corpse instead. On top of that, this is a baleful blood corpse of someone who was considered to be extremely powerful even among Grand Ascension stage beings. Once I refine this corpse, it'll be extremely effective both in battle, as well as for resisting heavenly tribulations. The crimson figure murmured to himself with an elated expression, before stowing his new treasure away as he cast a cold gaze toward the direction where the roar had come from. He then swept a sleeve through the air, releasing a burst of crimson light to sweep up the 5 Zuhi clones before flying directly toward the center of the crimson lake. At this point, the baleful blood corpse had finally completely devoured the black threads within its body and risen to its feet. In the face of the crimson light surging toward it, the corpse let loose another thunderous roar before flying out of the cage with a ferocious look in its eyes. Moments later, a fierce battle ensued in the air above the lake. I've finally repaired the formation. It should be able to support 2 or 3 more teleportations now, Han Li murmured to himself with a faint smile on his face as he appraised the repaired formation. During the past half a day, he had repaired and even slightly altered the formation with the materials he was carrying, thereby restoring its teleportation ability. He quickly made a hand seal, and the formation was easily activated amid a faint buzzing sound, upon which he immediately strode into the formation before vanishing on the spot amid a flash of white light. In the next instant, he arrived in a dark space. Blue light flashed within his eyes, and he was able to quickly take in his surroundings. At this moment, he was situated on the summit of a small mountain with several giant pine trees around him that were over 100 feet tall, while a small teleportation formation laid beneath his feet. There were even more mountains and trees in the distance, and it seemed that he was situated in a mountain range. After only a brief inspection of the surrounding area, Han Li suddenly swept a sleeve through the air to release an azure flying sword, which instantly swelled to over 1,000 feet in size before circling around in the air while releasing bright azure light. He then uttered the word slash, and the giant blade released massive sword projections over 10,000 feet in length in all directions. The space before the sword projections was instantly sliced apart, and the surrounding area immediately brightened as the mountain range twisted and warped before transforming into pristine white stone walls that were over 100 feet tall. The walls surrounded the small mountain and the trees around him in all directions, and it was revealed that he was situated in a massive courtyard. Hanli's eyes narrowed slightly as he inspected the white stone wall in the distance, and a peculiar look suddenly appeared on his face as he turned toward a certain tree on the small mountain. "You've been hiding there for quite some time now. Are you going to come out and meet me, or do I have to make you reveal yourself?" Chapter 2368, Meeting Fairy Eye Soul. "It sounds like you've been aware of my presence for quite some time already." A pleasant voice rang out as spatial fluctuations erupted behind the tree, following which a yellow-robed beauty emerged before appraising Hanli with a wary expression. This woman was completely identical in appearance to the Blood Soul, and a faint smile appeared on his face upon seeing this. However, his expression then changed slightly as he swept his spiritual sense toward the woman. "I didn't think I would encounter you as soon as I entered this space, fellow Taoist Ice Soul. On top of that, it looks like you've already progressed to the Grand Ascension stage," Hanli said. Indeed, this woman was also releasing a Grand Ascension stage aura, but it was still slightly unstable, indicating that she had only made the breakthrough recently. Letter 1D6ATF, letter 1D5FF, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D41, letter 1D430, letter 1D6AT, letter 1D41C, letter 1D698, letter 1D55E. The yellow-robed woman was quite surprised to hear this, and she asked in a cautious manner, "How do you know of me? Isn't this the first time we've met?" Even though she was also a Grand Ascension cultivator, her cultivation base hadn't been consolidated yet, so she was naturally quite wary of the other Grand Ascension stage beings to have entered this heavenly cauldron palace. "Rest assured, fellow Taoist, I'm also a human cultivator, and I was asked to come and rescue you by your blood soul clone. As for how I managed to find you, that's all thanks to this," Hanli replied as he made a grabbing motion to summon a small translucent vial that was flashing with faint crimson light, then tossed it toward the woman. Fairy Eye Soul caught the small vial before examining its contents, upon which an elated look appeared on her face. "So you're also a human Grand Ascension cultivator, and you're carrying a drop of my blood soul clone's blood essence. It's no wonder I was struck by the feeling that you were carrying something familiar to me as soon as you arrived here. Have you been trapped here this entire time? Haven't you thought of any ways to leave this place?" Hanli asked as he inspected his surroundings with a contemplative expression. "Of course I've tried to escape from here, but this is the centrum of the Heavenly Cauldron Palace, an independent space that was painstakingly created by Taoist Tian Ding. Aside from the teleportation formation that you just used, there's no other way to get out of here. All of my companions perished in battle on the way here, and the formation outside was also destroyed. At the time, I was only at the body integration stage, so I was trapped here and unable to do anything. Thankfully, I managed to obtain part of Taoist Tian Ding's inheritance here, and after all these years of cultivation, I finally reached the Grand Ascension stage a few years ago. By the way, where is my blood soul clone right now? Ever since you teleported into this space, I've been getting a vague feeling that she should also be in the Heavenly Cauldron Palace," Fairy Eye Soul replied. "It's quite remarkable that Taoist Tian Ding's inheritance was able to advance you to the Grand Ascension stage in such a short time, as expected of someone who was on the cusp of ascension at the time. Fellow Taoist Blood Soul is currently searching for you on the outskirts of the palace. It's a good thing that you had the foresight to create a Blood Soul clone. Otherwise, there's no way I would have been able to find you," Hanli replied with a smile. "The Blood Soul has done very well. I'm extremely surprised that she was about to recruit the assistance of such a powerful being in our human race. Initially, I had created her so that she could find some of my good friends from foreign races to help me," Fairy Eye Soul said. Perhaps the Blood Soul was of the opinion that I was a more reliable option," Hanli chuckled in response. "It's no surprise that the Blood Soul would think that, considering you're a Grand Ascension stage being. Back when I left our human race, I recall that only Senior Ao Zio and Senior Mo Jianli were Grand Ascension stage beings. You must have only recently reached the Grand Ascension stage. I'm familiar with some of the other renowned body integration stage fellow Taoists of our human race, but you don't seem to be one of them. Could it be that you're one of the cultivators who's constantly been cultivating in seclusion in our race?" Fairy Eye Soul asked with a puzzled expression. "I did indeed only recently reach the Grand Ascension stage, and it's no surprise that you don't recognize me. Truth be told, I came from the same human world as you did, and only after your disappearance did I ascend to the spirit realm. Come to think of it, we have quite a bit of affinity with one another. Back when I was in the human world, I once entered the Heaven Void Palace and obtained your Heaven Void Cauldron as well as some other treasures, Han Li replied with a faint smile. What? You obtained the Heaven Void Cauldron I left in the human world. If you only ascended after my disappearance, wouldn't that mean that it only took you a few thousand years to progress from the deity transformation stage to the grand ascension stage? Fairy Ice Soul was completely stunned upon hearing this. It was no wonder that she was so surprised. Even if the likes of Taoist Tian Ding had heard about Han Li's insane rate of progression, they would most likely also be rooted to the spot. I was quite fortunate and encountered many opportunities that allowed me to progress so quickly. It's a good thing I obtained the Heaven Void Cauldron you left behind in the human world. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been so easy for the Blood Soul and me to enter this Heavenly Cauldron Palace. Speaking of which, I'm not the only Grand Ascension stage being to have entered this palace, so we should leave this place as soon as possible. I took some measures to conceal the teleportation formation outside, but I can't guarantee that it won't be discovered by others. If you still have any questions, I'm sure the Blood Soul will be able to answer them once we reunited with her, Han Li said with a serious expression. Much to his surprise, a hesitant look appeared on Fairy Ice Soul's face upon hearing this. What is it? Is there still some unfinished business for you here? Han Li asked. Fairy Ice Soul hesitated momentarily before revealing. Seeing as you're a Grand Ascension stage being from the same race as myself, I won't keep any secrets from you. Even though I obtained Taoist Tian Ding's cultivations and many of the treasures here, there's one place that I haven't been able to access, and several of Taoist Tian Ding's most powerful treasures are situated there. Those treasures have a symbiotic effect with Taoist Tian Ding's cultivation arts, so they're extremely important to me. It was naturally in her best interest to keep this a secret, but if they were to leave now, there would be no chance for her to obtain those treasures. Where is this place? If it won't result in too much of a delay, then I can go and take a look. If it's within my capabilities, I'll be sure to help you secure the treasures, Han Li said. Fairy Ice Soul was ecstatic to hear this. Rest assured, Brother Han, it's not far away at all. If you can help me break the restriction, you can have all of the treasures aside from the few that are related to my cultivation arts. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face, but he offered no reply. Thus, he was quickly led over to a section of the stone wall by Fairy Ice Soul, who reached out to gently press her palm against the wall. A huge hole instantly appeared on the stone wall amid a flash of light, and the two of them flew into the hole. Around 15 minutes later, they appeared in a massive hall that was entirely constructed from giant white stone slabs, presenting an antiquated and mysterious appearance. At the center of the hall stood another statue of Taoist Tian Ding, but this one was shimmering with faint silver light. This statue also had a sword slung across its back, but it was also holding a miniature shimmering golden pagoda in one hand. The treasures are all in that pagoda. Unfortunately, even though I've remained in this place for so many years, I've still been unable to break the restriction on the pagoda. Do take care, Brother Han. The restriction has an extremely powerful reflective ability. I was once struck by my own attack after it was reflected back at me, and it took me over 10 years of recuperation to recover, Fairy Ice Soul said with a solemn expression. Han Li raised an eyebrow upon hearing this, and he replied, "All right, let me give it a try." He then swept a finger through the air to release a streak of azure sword chi that slashed directly toward the small golden pagoda. A burst of light swept over the surface of the pagoda, and it conjured up a translucent light barrier that was as smooth as a mirror. The sword chi struck the light barrier before instantly vanishing into, following which an identical streak of azure sword chi shot out of the light barrier, hurtling directly toward Han Li. Han Li immediately swept his finger through the air again to unleash another streak of azure sword chi to nullify the one sweeping toward him. In the next instant, countless arcs of golden lightning erupted over his body amid a loud thunderclap, then pounced toward the small pagoda as several golden lightning snakes. As soon as the lightning snakes came into contact with the light barrier, they also vanished before the same number of lightning snakes shot back out of the light barrier toward Han Li. This reflective restriction is quite interesting, but generally speaking, restrictions of this nature all have a tolerance limit, so what if I were to use a more powerful attack? A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face as he made a grabbing motion to eradicate all of the oncoming lightning snakes, then flipped a hand over to summon a miniature azure mountain. At the same time, bright golden light erupted from his body, and a layer of golden scales surfaced over his skin, while his arms thickened significantly. He grabbed onto the miniature azure mountain before hurling it viciously forward, and it disappeared into thin air in a flash. In the next instant, spatial fluctuations suddenly erupted in front of the small golden pagoda, and the miniature azure mountain reappeared before crashing into the light barrier with a resounding boom, causing the barrier to ripple violently. Chapter 2369, Securing the Treasures. An earth-shattering boom rang out, and the entire light barrier caved in as white cracks appeared all over its surface, looking as if it were going to shatter at any moment. Right at this moment, the small pagoda that the statue of Taoist Tian Ding was holding began to release wisps of white light that rapidly vanished into the light barrier to repair the cracks that had just appeared. The caved-in section of the light barrier also returned to normal, and the miniature azure mountain was repelled. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, and he swept a hand through the air to draw the miniature mountain back up his sleeve. Very Eye's soul was quite stunned that Han Li was almost able to shatter the light barrier with just a casual attack, and she quickly explained, "That statue of Taoist Tian Ding is no ordinary statue, Brother Han. It can assist the small pagoda, and I exhausted every method I could think of, but still couldn't break through their combined restriction." "In that case, I'll destroy this statue first," Han Li said as a cold look flashed through his eyes. All of a sudden, his body began to swell drastically in size, and he transformed into a giant golden ape that was over 100 feet tall amid a flash of golden light. At the same time, the Provenance True Devil projection emerged behind him. Immediately thereafter, he flipped his hands over to summon a pair of miniature mountains, one black and one azure, both of which instantly swelled to several tens of feet tall. Han Li then hurled the pair of extreme mountains through the air with incredible force, targeting the statue of Taoist Tian Ding on this occasion. As soon as the pair of mountains left his grasp, they immediately transformed into a pair of balls of light before reaching the statue in a flash amid a piercing screech. The light barrier that was originally only protecting the pagoda immediately swelled to encompass the entire statue, and at the same time, the longsword slung across the statue's back also tremored slightly. 2 streaks of azure sword chi were unleashed by the statue, before striking the pair of oncoming mountains like lightning amid a thunderous boom. The 2 small mountains only shuddered slightly before eradicating the 2 streaks of sword chi with their fearsome power, but their momentum was also significantly diminished as a result. The pair of mountains then struck the light barrier, and bright white light erupted from the statue's body again, threatening to repel the pair of small mountains. Right at this moment, Han Li took a step forward and instantly vanished into thin air. In the next instant, he appeared above the light barrier before clenching his huge furry fists, then thrust them violently downward, unleashing countless purplish golden fist projections that rained down upon the light barrier in a torrential barrage. In the beginning, the fist projections were merely disappearing into the light barrier, but the light barrier's rate of absorption gradually became more sluggish, and in the end, it could only rely on its own fortitude to resist the rest of the fist projections. Thus, one purplish golden fist projection after another began to explode on the surface of the light barrier, which was beginning to flash erratically. A fierce look appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this, and he suddenly withdrew his fists before making a hand seal, upon which the Provenance True Devil projection behind him adopted its golden body form before thrusting its 6 shimmering golden palms down toward the light barrier in unison. A resounding boom rang out as 6 golden balls of light appeared, then combined as one to form a giant golden vortex. Countless golden runes surged out of the vortex alongside the sound of Buddhist chants before crashing down with tremendous force. Right at this moment, 2 beams of white light erupted out of the eyes of the Taoist Tian Ding statue before hurtling directly toward the golden vortex up above. The golden vortex suddenly released a burst of devastating power that crashed down upon the light barrier, which was already beginning to sway and tremble. All of a sudden, a series of white formations appeared on the surface of the statue, releasing piercing white light that bolstered the light barrier and prevented it from being shattered. However, the vortex continued to revolve rapidly while sending waves of enormous power surging down from above, displaying no signs of stopping at all. Despite the statue's profound powers, there was no way it would be able to withstand such a fearsome assault. After the span of just a few breaths, the white light radiating from the statue faded, as did all of the white formations, and countless cracks appeared on its surface before it suddenly crumbled. Without the statue's support, the golden pagoda was even less equipped to withstand the tremendous force being exerted upon it, and almost as soon as the Taoist Tian Ding statue was destroyed, the light barrier being released by the small pagoda also shattered. Han Li's eyes immediately lit up upon seeing this, and he waved a hand downward, upon which the golden vortex and pair of extreme mountains vanished in a flash. At the same time, the small golden pagoda was also drawn into his grasp. Fairy Eye's soul had spent countless years trying to secure this pagoda, all to no avail, yet Han Li had managed to obtain it with ease. He appeared beside Fairy Eye's soul amid a flash of golden light, then quickly reverted back to his human form. After briefly inspecting the contents of the pagoda with his spiritual sense, he handed the treasure over to Fairy Ice Soul in an unhurried manner. "Fellow Taoist Ice Soul, take a look and see if this pagoda contains the treasures you need." Fairy Ice Soul was still astonished by what she had just witnessed, and she hurriedly shook her head as she said, "You broke this restriction entirely through your own power. How could I choose treasures for myself before you? You should select 3 treasures first, and I'll choose what I need out of the rest." "I've already inspected everything in this pagoda. Aside from a jade slip that contains a secret technique that I could study, none of the other treasures have much use to me, so all I need is a replica of the contents of that jade slip," Han Li said with a smile before tossing the small golden pagoda directly toward Fairy Eye Soul. A grateful look appeared on Fairy Eye Soul's face as she said, "I'll be sure to repay you for your kindness in the future, Brother Han." She then examined the 7 or 8 treasures in the pagoda with her spiritual sense, before drawing out a crimson jade slip that she immediately handed over to Han Li. "This must be the jade slip that you mentioned. If it's useful to you, then just take it. There's no need to make a replica." "In that case, I'll be taking this jade slip." Han Li made no effort to turn her down and accepted the crimson jade slip. A faint smile appeared on Fairy Eye Soul's face upon seeing this. "Now that the treasures have been secured, let's get out of here. Otherwise, someone could destroy the formation outside again, and it'll be very difficult for us to leave this place," Han Li said. "Please wait for a while longer, Brother Han. During my years in this heavenly cauldron palace, I've managed to gain control over some of its restrictions. I'll activate some things that I've already set up in advance in the Centrum formation, so that I can close this palace at any time. That'll make it so that we'd be able to teleport out of here as soon as we reunite with my blood soul," Fairy Ice Soul said with a smile. Han Li naturally had no reason to disagree, so he nodded in response. "That's a good idea. Go right ahead, fellow Taoist." Thus, the 2 of them flew out of the hall, and shortly thereafter, they arrived in front of the teleportation formation Han Li had used to enter this space. Han Li made a hand seal before casting an incantation seal toward the formation, upon which it was instantly activated, and a faint smile appeared on his face upon seeing this. The 2 of them strode into the formation and vanished on the spot. Outside the mountainous crimson stone plaque, Xiao Ming's trio was gathered near several massive silver runes on the stone plaque surface, discussing something with serious expression. After an arduous struggle, the 3 of them finally managed to make it into this space. "Fellow Taoist Qing Ping, are you sure this is where the entrance to the Centrum is situated? Is it possible that you've made a mistake? Why is it that we've tried everything but have still been unable to open this plaque?" Xiao Ming asked. "It's definitely the right place, but the original entry method seems to have been tampered with and rendered ineffective. I know some beveled silver text, but I'm far from an expert. I'll give this another try, and if it still doesn't work, we'll have to break in using brute force. Doing so may trigger some other restrictions, but we don't have any other choice," Taoist Qing Ping replied with a dark expression. "All right, do your best, fellow Taoist Qing Ping. If worse comes to worst, we'll just have to break this restriction with our combined powers," Xiao Ming replied with a nod, and Mistress Wan Hua didn't have any objections either. Thus, Taoist Qing Ping took a deep breath before making a rapid string of hand seals while chanting an incantation. The 4 giant silver runes on the stone plaque before him began to glow brightly, and they slowly began to move along a certain trajectory, but the rate at which they were moving was extremely slow. Around 15 minutes later, Taoist Qing Ping suddenly pointed a finger toward a certain part of the stone plaque and yelled, "Open." The 4 silver runes blurred before instantly combining as one to form a huge ball of silver light. Taoist Qing Ping's chanting became more urgent, and the silver ball of light began to rapidly revolve on the spot. But after the span of just a few breaths, The ball of light exploded before reverting back into 4 silver runes that returned to their original positions. It seemed that his efforts had gone to waste, and the trio's expressions darkened even further upon seeing this. Chapter 2370, Joining Forces. After a brief silence, Xiao Ming cleared his throat, yet just as he was about to say something, a faint buzzing sound rang out from the silver runes before them, and they converged again to form a silver formation. The entire formation lit up, and spatial fluctuations erupted from its center, following which a massive hole appeared. A man and a woman then flew out of the hole, and the man faltered slightly at the sight of Xiao Ming's trio before a hint of a smile appeared on his face. "What a coincidence! I didn't expect to see you here, fellow Taoists." Meanwhile, the woman beside him was appraising Xiao Ming's duo with a hint of surprise and wariness in her eyes. This duo was comprised of none other than Han Li and Fairy Ice Soul. The expressions of Xiao Ming's trio changed drastically upon seeing this, and they quickly exchanged a glance with one another. Among all of the potential situations they had anticipated, this was the worst one. "Have you already obtained Daoist Tian Ding's inheritance, Brother Han?" Xiao Ming asked with a dark expression. "No, but my companion did. Is there a problem?" Han Li replied with a nonchalant smile. Even if he were to deny this, there was no way Xiao Ming would believe him, so he decided to admit it instead. Xiao Ming's trio was quite surprised to hear this, and they immediately turned their attention toward Fairy Ice Soul, upon which a flash of recognition and astonishment surfaced in Xiao Ming's eyes. It was clear that he had mistaken Fairy Ice Soul for the Blood Soul, and he was stunned that her cultivation base had increased so drastically in such a short time. Taoist Qing Ping and Mistress Wan Hua had naturally also noticed this, and they were quite perplexed as well. But in contrast with this, the fact that Daoist Tian Ding's inheritance had already been obtained by someone else was naturally a far more pressing concern. Xiao Ming heaved a resigned sigh as he said, "The 3 of us also ventured into this place for Daoist Tian Ding's inheritance, but with Brother Han here, we naturally can't try to take the inheritance from this fellow Taoist by force. How about we made a deal? We won't ask for any of the treasures left behind by Daoist Tian Ding, but we'd like to each get a replica copy of his cultivation arts, secret techniques, and tribulation transcendence methods. Of course, we'll offer you satisfactory compensation in exchange." "That sounds like a good arrangement. What do you think, fellow Taoist Ice Soul?" Han Li asked. "I did obtain several of Senior Tian Ding's cultivation arts, but they were all imprinted directly into my spiritual sense through a secret technique. The secret technique also contained a blood vow restriction that prohibits me from passing on these cultivation arts to anyone else before I achieve full mastery in them. Otherwise, I run the risk of perishing from having my nascent soul explode. As for tribulation transcendence methods, I'm afraid there aren't any." According to the records left behind by Senior Tian Ding, he was only able to transcend so many major heavenly tribulations as he had once consumed the seed of a cloud lightning immortal fruit. Fairy Ice Soul replied with a wry smile. Everyone else faltered slightly upon hearing this. "Isn't the cloud lightning immortal fruit something that can only be found in the true immortal realm? If Daoist Tian Ding really did consume a seed from this fruit, then it explains how he was able to transcend so many major heavenly tribulations. However, how do I know if you're telling the truth?" Taoist Qing Ping asked as his brows furrowed slightly. "How do you want me to prove this?" Fairy Ice Soul asked in a cold voice. "I've cultivated a secret technique that can read one's memories without harming their soul as long as they're willing to open up their spiritual sense to me. Don't even think about it. Opening up one's spiritual sense is no different from placing one's life in someone else's hands. No one would open up their spiritual sense to a stranger." Fairy Ice Soul immediately rejected. "What do you think, fellow Taoist Han? Surely you can't just expect us to go away empty-handed," Taoist Qing Ping said as he turned to Han Li with a dark expression. "My companion doesn't wish to comply, so that will be the end of this discussion. If you don't want to go away empty-handed, you can go inside and search through the area. Perhaps you might find something. We'll be taking our leave now," Han Li replied in a nonchalant manner. "What, you can't just leave?" Mistress Wan Hua exclaimed in a furious manner. "Why not?" A cold look appeared on Han Li's face, and he took a step forward, releasing a fearsome aura that would strike fear into even an ordinary Grand Ascension stage being's heart. Taoist Qing Ping and Mistress Wan Hua were both forced to stumble back a few steps in the face of this formidable aura. In contrast, Xiao Ming only shuddered slightly before steadying himself, but a layer of crimson light had appeared over his mask. Han Li's eyes narrowed slightly upon seeing this, and he took another step forward as his aura swelled even further. Xiao Ming felt as if he were facing a ferocious ancient beast, and he gave a muffled groan as he also took an involuntary backward step. A hint of wariness flashed through his eyes, and he said, "As expected, you really did conceal most of your power during our sparring match with fellow Taoist Wan Hua. Your magic power is most likely not inferior even to that of ancient true spirit beings." Han Li offered no reply as he clasped his hands behind his back, and his aura didn't abate in the slightest as he appraised the trio in silence. Hesitant and indignant looks had appeared on both Mistress Wan Hua and Taoist Qing Ping's face. It was clear that they didn't want to give up on Taoist Tian Ding's inheritance, but at the same time, they were very fearful of Han Li. After taking a meaningful glance at Han Li, Xiao Ming sighed, "Let's go." "What? How can we just leave like this, Brother Xiao?" Taoist Qing Ping's expression changed drastically upon hearing this. "Even the three of us combined most likely wouldn't be a match for fellow Taoist Han, so why not spare ourselves the embarrassment? Do you have something up your sleeve that can allow us to oppose Brother Han?" Xiao Ming asked in a calm manner. Taoist Qing Ping faltered slightly upon hearing this, before shaking his head with a wry smile. Right at this moment, a seductive female voice suddenly rang out in the distance. "He, then how about the two of us join you as well?" Immediately thereafter, spatial fluctuations erupted in the distant sky, and two streaks of light shot forth at an incredible speed, arriving on the scene in the blink of an eye. The two streaks of light then faded to reveal Patriarch Wu Gu and Fairy Huazai. Fairy Eye Soul's heart immediately sank upon seeing this, while Han Li's expression remained completely unchanged as he cast his gaze toward the duo. "Why are you two here?" Taoist Qing Ping was stunned by this sudden turn of events. "I'm afraid that's a secret," Fairy Huazai replied with a mysterious smile. All of a sudden, a thought seemed to have occurred to Xiao Ming, and his expression darkened slightly as he said, "Fellow Taoist Wan Hua, fellow Taoist Qing Ping, examine yourselves to see if something has been planted on you." "Surely not. There's no way we would have failed to notice something like that," Mistress Wan Hua exclaimed, but she still did as suggested, hurriedly releasing her spiritual sense to examine her own body from the inside to the outside. Taoist Qing Ping also began to examine his Taoist robes and the accessories he was wearing. Moments later, Mistress Wan Hua screamed as she suddenly pulled a near-transparent flying insect out of her hair. The insect was only around half an inch in length, and as thin as a strand of hair. "This is a spotless insect. No wonder I wasn't able to detect it at all. When did you plant this on me?" Mistress Wan Hua immediately crushed the insect in a furious manner. "Of course it was prior to entering the Heavenly Cauldron Palace. Otherwise, who would we have followed you all the way here? It's your fault for failing to keep your plan confidential," Fairy Huazai replied with a smile, completely unfazed by Mistress Wan Hua's fury. "Looks like I'll have to clean out some pests once I get back. Having said that, it's not a bad thing that the two of you followed us here. Brother Han, now that we have two more allies, have you changed your mind?" Taoist Qing Ping asked as he turned to Han Li again. "I won't repeat myself. Either get out of here now or face me in battle," Han Li replied in a nonchalant manner, seemingly completely unafraid of the 5 Grand Ascension stage beings. Such a response evoked a sense of fury in the hearts of not just Taoist Qing Ping and Mistress Wan Hua, but also Fairy Huazai. Taoist Qing Ping forcibly repressed his own rage as he turned to Xiao Ming. "What do you say, Brother Xiao? If you insist on resisting, then you'll be placing me in a very difficult situation, Brother Han. I'm aware that you possess unfathomable powers, but there's no way we'll be able to just let you and your companion leave. Let me ask this a final time. Is there any room for negotiation here?" If fellow Taoist I Soul could replicate a few copies of the cultivation arts she obtained, then I'd want to avoid this battle as well. However, as things currently are, I'll have no choice but to stand against you, Han Li chuckled. Chapter 2371, Battling the 5 Grand Ascension Stage Beings. "Brother Han, seeing as you're intent on sticking up for this woman, it looks like a battle is unavoidable. Fairy Huazai, Brother Wu Gu, the three of us will take on fellow Taoist Han. There's no need to defeat him, just keep him occupied so Qing Ping and Wan Hu can capture his companion. We'll split our treasures evenly, then make a replica copy of Taoist Tian Ding's cultivation arts for each of us. What do you think?" Xiao Ming asked as he turned to Fairy Huazai. "What? The three of us are taking him on together. When did the deranged devil of the blood-bone sect become so cowardly? Fairy Huazai scoffed. HMPH, you're only saying that because you don't know anything about fellow Taoist Han. Let me tell you. Xiao Ming's sentence was completed through voice transmission. Fairy Huazai's expression changed drastically upon hearing what he had to say, and she cast a wary glance toward Han Li before nodding in response. All right, my Dao companion and I will help you keep him occupied, but I'd advise fellow Taoist Qing Ping and fellow Taoist Wan Hua not to get any funny ideas after you capture that woman. Otherwise, you'll have to bear the consequences. Taoist Qing Ping was ecstatic to hear this, and he hurriedly replied, Rest assured, Fairy Huazai, we definitely wouldn't do something so foolish. Letter 1D627, letter 1D4C7, letter 212F, letter 1D452, letter 1D4CC, letter 1D452, letter 1D4B8, letter 2134, letter 1D4C2. Mistress Wan Hua was also nodding emphatically with an eager expression. Despite the fact that 5 Grand Ascension stage beings were plotting against him right before his eyes, a faint smile appeared on Han Li's face as he transmitted his voice toward the horrified Fairy Eye Soul. At the same time, he moved one of his pinkies ever so slightly behind his own back, and a virtually invisible golden thread flashed through the air. Fairy Eye Soul's expression changed slightly upon hearing Han Li's voice transmission, and the fear in her eyes abated significantly. Go, Xiao Ming yelled as a massive crimson cloud that was around an acre in area appeared around him, following which a giant nine-eyed toad emerged amid a low roar. As soon as the nine-eyed blood toad appeared, the 9 demonic eyes on its head sprang open, releasing 9 crimson pillars of light that hurtled directly past Han Li toward Fairy Eye Soul. Fairy Eye Soul hurriedly twisted to the side in an alarmed manner before instantly teleporting over 1,000 feet away. Right at this moment, Fairy Huazai swept her sleeves through the air to release a series of translucent palm-sized rings, of which there were over 100. These rings emitted a faint buzzing sound at her behest before shooting through the air like a torrential storm, reaching Han Li in a flash and crashing toward him from all sides. At the same time, Patriarch Wu Gu opened his mouth to release a burst of golden flames, which formed a sea of flames that inundated his entire body. The sea of flames then swelled to become a fiery wave that was over 100 feet tall, and even before the wave had reached Han Li, an indescribable scorching sensation had already befallen him, as if the very space around him had been ignited. As expected of a trio of Grand Ascension stage beings, Xiao Ming and his allies were unleashing extremely fearsome attacks, and their teamwork was seamless. They had managed to force Fairy Eye Soul away from Han Li with ease, but strangely enough, Han Li was displaying no intention to go and help her. Instead, a faint smile appeared on his face as he swept a hand through the air, summoning 3 small mountains that were each over 100 feet tall. The trio of mountains revolved on the spot, transforming into an extremely thick light barrier, and the countless rings struck the light barrier amid a string of dull thumps, but the barrier remained completely unmoved. As for the wave of golden flames, it was only able to make the light barrier flash slightly a few times, but was also unable to inflict any damage. A cold look flashed through Han Li's eyes, and he suddenly let loose a low roar as he transformed into a giant golden ape that was over 1,000 feet tall amid a flash of golden light. He then extended his arms out of the light barrier before him, then swung them viciously toward Fairy Huazai and Patriarch Wu Gu. A resounding boom rang out as 2 balls of light, one azure and one black, were sent hurtling through the air before reaching Patriarch Wu Gu and Fairy Huazai in a flash, then reverted back into a pair of small mountains. Even before the mountains had struck their targets, 2 bursts of tremendous force swept through the air, causing the space near Patriarch Wu Gu and Fairy Huazai to tremor slightly. Fairy Huazai's expression changed slightly in the face of such a fearsome attack, and she immediately shot back in retreat while waving a hand through the air. The countless rings instantly converged to form a giant translucent ring with a diameter of around 300 to 400 feet at her behest, then descended onto the oncoming mountain before rapidly shrinking. A burst of piercing light erupted forth, and the mountain faltered slightly before drawing to a halt in midair. Meanwhile, Patriarch Wu Gu made a hand seal, and the sea of golden flames nearby immediately converged toward the center to form a golden fiery giant that was over 1,000 feet tall, before throwing a fearless punch at the oncoming mountain. An earth-shattering boom rang out as the giant's fist clashed with the mountain, upon which the fiery giant's entire arm exploded into golden flames. The mountain faltered slightly in midair before continuing onward, only to be greeted by the fiery giant's other fist, and the same sequence repeated itself. However, at this point, the fiery giant's other arm had already regenerated, and it immediately lashed out again. Thus, one punch after another slammed into the small mountain, causing it to tremor incessantly and preventing it from making any meaningful progress. As for the nine-eyed blood toad, it was swinging its long tongue violently through the air, creating a crimson net that was keeping a barrage of giant fist projections at bay. The fist projections were being unleashed by Han Li from afar, and thus, a fierce battle ensued between the four Grand Ascension stage beings. Mistress Wan Hua and Taoist Qing Ping were ecstatic to see this, and they exchanged a quick glance, then teleported to either side of Fairy Ice Soul before she could do anything. Mistress Wan Hua chuckled coldly as she plucked a black wooden hairpin out of her own hair, which immediately transformed into a black longsword in her grasp. A layer of scorching black flames emerged over the sword's surface, and Mistress Wan Hua slashed the sword through the air, conjuring up a black fiery python that was over 1,000 feet in length, which pounced toward Fairy Ice Soul with a ferocious roar. Meanwhile, Taoist Qing Ping swept a sleeve through the air, and an azure horsetail brush appeared in his hand before being swept toward Fairy Ice Soul from afar. Countless streaks of azure light instantly appeared, covering virtually the entire sky and encompassing Fairy Ice Soul from all directions. Fairy Ice Soul's expression darkened slightly upon seeing this, and she raised a hand to summon a translucent ice shield before opening her mouth to expel a ball of energy onto the shield. The shield immediately transformed into a translucent ice barrier that was giving off a glacial aura, protecting her from all sides. The azure threads struck the ice barrier like a torrential storm, but they were all kept at bay. As opposed to being disheartened to see this, Mistress Wan Hua's eyes lit up as she pointed a finger toward the black fiery worm. The black flames on the worm's body immediately swelled up by around twofold, and it pounced toward Fairy Ice Soul with unstoppable might. The black flames were making the surrounding temperature spike drastically, nullifying most of the glacial chi being released by the ice shield. All of a sudden, a massive bolt of lightning that was as thick as a water tank appeared out of thin air mid a resounding thunderclap, before striking the black worm's head with unerring accuracy. Countless arcs of silver lightning exploded in all directions, and the black worm's body disintegrated into specks of black flames mid an anguished cry. "Who's there?" Mistress Wan Hua exclaimed as she hurriedly inspected her surroundings. Before she had a chance to do anything, another loud thunderclap rang out, and countless arcs of silver lightning appeared before quickly converging to form a ball. Golden light flashed within the lightning, and a massive shimmering golden creature appeared. Mistress Wan Hua hurriedly focused her gaze on the creature, to find that it was an enormous crab that was about an acre in size, with a pair of dazzling giant claws. Mistress Wan Hua was quite stunned to see this creature, and the fearsome aura emanating from the giant golden crab's body told her that this was a formidable opponent. Before she had a chance to consider where the giant crab had come from, it raised one of its pincers before snapping it shut. A semi-transparent giant pincer projection immediately appeared out of thin air before snapping viciously toward her alongside countless arcs of silver lightning. Mistress Wan Hua harumphed coldly as a massive black lion projection emerged behind her, and it opened its cavernous mouth to release a ball of black light toward the huge pincer. The ball of black light immediately exploded upon contact with the pincer, transforming into a series of fiery chains that instantly bound the pincer tightly. Chapter 2372, Glacial Xuan Wu Turtle. However, in the next instant, the giant pincers were rubbed together vigorously, and the silver lightning abruptly swelled up, eradicating the fiery chains before forming a ball of lightning that hurtled through the air. Mistress Wan Hua's heart jolted slightly upon seeing this, and he quickly made a hand seal, upon which the top of her head opened up to release a green wooden shield. At the same time, the giant black lion behind her released a pillar of black light amid a thunderous roar. The ball of lightning struck the wooden shield before being repelled, following which the pillar of black light pierced through it and eradicated it in a flash. However, instead of being elated to see this, Mistress Wan Hua's expression darkened even further as she swept her sleeves through the air, releasing countless black flying needles that formed a formation filled with surging black chi. The fact that such a casual strike from the giant golden crab had been this powerful told her that she would have to focus entirely on facing this opponent, thereby preventing her from going after Fairy Ice Soul. Taoist Qing Ping was naturally very frustrated to see this. Who would have thought that someone would suddenly step in to foil their plans? After witnessing the fearsome attack that the golden crab had just unleashed, he also knew that he would be able to count on Mistress Wan Hua anytime soon. With that in mind, he swept his horsetail brush through the air, releasing a torrent of azure threads that was around twice as dense as before toward his target. At the same time, he raised his other hand, hurling the azure mirror forward as a ball of azure light. All of a sudden, a black and white yin-yang diagram appeared on the mirror's surface, then abruptly emerged above Fairy Ice Soul. A burst of rumbling rang out as wooden sticks that were each several inches in length flew out of the diagram before swelling to several tens of feet in length, then crashed down from above amid a flurry of azure runes. Taoist Qing Ping had also identified that Fairy Ice Soul had only recently reached the Grand Ascension stage, so he was exerting immense pressure on her from the get-go to try and capture her as quickly as possible. In the face of the azure runes and giant logs, the ice barrier quickly began to struggle, and finally, a series of thin cracks began to appear on its surface. However, Fairy Ice Soul wasn't all that alarmed to see this. Instead, she took a deep breath before sitting down with her legs crossed, then made a hand seal. A huge snowy white turtle projection suddenly flew out of the top of her head. The turtle had countless translucent ice spikes on its shell, and its entire body was giving off a glacial aura. As soon as it appeared, it opened its mouth to expel one ball of white glacial chi after another, all of which vanished into the ice barrier in a flash. As a result, the struggling ice barrier immediately lit up, and the cracks that had just appeared were instantly sealed, thereby stabilizing the entire barrier again. "That's the glacial Xuan Wu turtle," Taoist Qing Ping exclaimed at the sight of the ice turtle before quickly making a series of hand seals, upon which a giant Taoist priest projection appeared behind him. This Taoist robes worn by the projection had a yin-yang diagram emblazoned on its surface, and as soon as the projection appeared, countless specks of starlight converged from all directions in a frenzy, causing the projection to expand in size by over tenfold, swelling to over 1,000 feet tall. Right at this moment, Taoist Qing Ping made a hand seal with a solemn expression, and the giant Taoist priest projection behind him rubbed its hands together before raising them in unison, releasing a vast expanse of white lightning that surged toward the ice barrier with devastating force. Fairy Ice Soul's expression changed slightly upon seeing this, and she injected more of her magic power into the turtle projection above her, upon which it also expanded drastically, and the amount of glacial chi it was releasing increased by roughly twofold. With this increased influx of glacial chi, the ice barrier was able to keep all of the oncoming attacks at bay. Taoist Qing Ping's heart sank slightly upon seeing this, and only then did he realize that even though his opponent was slightly lacking in power, her ice attribute cultivation arts were extremely profound. If she were to continue to persist in her passive defense, it would be very difficult to take her down in a short time. Thus, he could only continue to attack the ice barrier with all his might, hoping to exhaust his opponent's magic power before capturing her. As for Mistress Wan Hua and the giant golden crab, they were also locked in a fierce battle that didn't look as if it would conclude anytime soon. Meanwhile, after a series of probing clashes to feel out one another's abilities, Han Li and his opponents were finally beginning to display their true power as well. Seeing as the fist projections alone weren't enough to defeat the nine-eyed blood toad, a cold light flashed through Han Li's eyes, and the Provenance True Devil projection appeared behind him amid a flash of golden light before substantiating into the Provenance golden body. The three faces of the golden body were identical to Han Li's, but each wore a different expression. Han Li then let loose a long roar as he laid a hand onto the top of his own head, releasing a burst of black chi that vanished into the golden body in a flash. The Provenance golden body shuddered slightly before instantly opening its 6 eyes in unison, then abruptly disappeared on the spot. In the next instant, the Provenance golden body appeared above the nine-eyed blood toad amid a burst of spatial fluctuations, then conjured up a giant golden blade in each of its 6 hands. The golden blades were around 300 to 400 feet in length, and as they were slashed through the air, countless streaks of sword chi were released, forming a golden tornado that swept toward the nine-eyed blood toad down below. Even before the golden tornado had truly descended, it was releasing golden blade projections that were threatening to tear the surrounding space apart. Xiao Ming's heart jolted slightly upon seeing this, and he didn't dare to use his toad tongue to oppose the golden blade projection. Instead, he let loose a loud croak, and countless silver runes appeared on the bulges on his back before leaving his body and quickly intertwining to form a silver net. The golden blade projections that struck the net all vanished into it in a flash, and taking advantage of this opportunity, the nine-eyed blood toad's stomach bulged before it opened its mouth again, releasing an azure ball of light that was around 10 feet in diameter with countless crimson threads on its surface. The ball of light struck the oncoming tornado in a flash, and an earth-shattering boom rang out as the golden tornado dissipated, revealing the provenant's golden body behind it. At this moment, half of the giant blades being wielded by the golden body had been destroyed, and a massive hole had been blown into its chest. However, there was no blood or flesh in the wound, and it was quickly regenerating from converging specks of golden light, while the destroyed blades in its hands were also replaced. As soon as the provenant's golden body fully recovered, it slashed its 6 golden blades downward once again. The nine-eyed blood toad didn't want to continue to fight fire with fire, and it abruptly shrank down drastically while releasing clouds of crimson mist out of its back, forming a sea of mist that inundated its entire body. The provenant's golden body displayed no intention of retreating upon seeing this, and instead, it plunged directly into the sea of mist as a gust of fierce wind. Moments later, a string of rumbling explosions rang out, indicating that a ferocious battle was taking place. A cold smile appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this, and he reached out toward the crimson mist with a giant furry hand. However, in the next instant, his expression suddenly changed slightly, and his head swiveled around 180 degrees, while his outstretched hand also clenched into a tight fist before shooting backward like lightning. Almost at the exact same moment, a gray shadow appeared behind him amid a burst of spatial fluctuations, then reached out toward Han Li's back with an azure hand. A rank odor was emanating from the fingertips of the azure hand, and it was immediately struck by Han Li's punch. As soon as the clash took place, a burst of golden shockwaves surged through the air, and the gray shadow was sent flying, having been caught off guard. However, it then immediately unleashed some type of secret technique, allowing it to twist around before flying toward Han Li again from an incredible angle. Han Li let loose a thunderous roar as he completely turned around before unleashing countless fist projections, transforming the entire space around him into a world of fierce golden wind. However, the gray shadow seemed to be completely weightless, and even though it was being sent flying over and over again by the fist projections, it remained completely unharmed while continuing to pester Han Li from nearby. Even after unleashing several hundred punches, the gray shadow still remained completely unaffected. A cold smile appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this. That's a very interesting cultivation art that's allowing you to nullify the majority of the force of my attacks, but let's see if it'll stand up to a sword strike. As soon as his voice trailed off, he withdrew his fists before sweeping a finger toward the gray shadow from afar, releasing an azure sword projection that sliced the gray shadow apart like lightning. However, the gray shadow didn't shed even a single drop of blood and merely vanished on the spot. Spatial fluctuations then erupted several hundred feet away, and another gray humanoid figure emerged. It turned out that the gray shadow had already escaped using a secret technique, and what had been sliced apart by the sword projection was nothing more than an afterimage. However, the features of the gray figure had been completely exposed, and it was none other than Patriarch Wu Gu. Han Li's pupils contracted slightly upon seeing this, and he cast his gaze toward Fairy Huazai, who was still opposing one of the extreme mountains with her rings. The fiery golden giant stood not far away from her, releasing countless golden fireballs out of its 2 hands to oppose the second extreme mountain.